And dance, Grizzly Bear attacks high school track team, May 23rd, 2024. The morning of May 23rd, 2024, dawned crisp and clear over the Rattlesnake Wilderness area north of Missoula, Montana, with the kind of pristine mountain air that made Coach Andrew Bell feel grateful to be alive. At 43 years old, Bell had been coaching cross-country and track at Roosevelt High School for nearly 2 decades, and he still felt the same surge of anticipation every time he loaded his team into the school's aging Ford van for their weekly wilderness training runs. The digital clock on his dashboard read 6:47 a.m. as he pulled into the school parking lot, the first pale rays of sunlight painting the surrounding peaks in shades of gold and amber. Andrew Marcus Bell had grown up in these very mountains, the son of a Forest Service ranger and a high school English teacher. His childhood had been spent exploring every trail, creek bed, and hidden valley within a 50-mile radius of Missoula. After a brief stint at the University of Montana, where he'd competed in Division I cross-country, a knee injury had ended his competitive running career, but it had also led him to discover his true calling as an educator and coach. He'd met his wife Sarah during his student teaching semester, and together they'd built a life centered around their shared love of the outdoors and their commitment to helping young people discover their own strength and resilience. Bell stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with the lean, weathered build of someone who'd spent decades running mountain trails. His graying brown hair was always slightly tousled, and his bright blue eyes held the kind of genuine warmth that made teenagers want to push themselves harder than they thought possible. He had a way of seeing potential in kids that others might overlook, and his teams consistently outperformed much larger, better-funded programs from around the state. More importantly, his former athletes regularly returned years later to thank him for lessons that had shaped their lives far beyond the realm of competitive running. The Roosevelt High School track and cross-country program had become legendary under Bell's leadership. What had started as a small, underfunded team had grown into a powerhouse that regularly sent athletes to state championships and collegiate programs. Bell's philosophy was simple: respect the mountains, respect yourself, and respect your teammates. Every Wednesday during the spring and fall seasons, weather permitting, he would take his most dedicated athletes up into the Rattlesnake Wilderness for what he called real running, trail runs that challenged them physically and mentally while connecting them to the natural world that surrounded their community. On this particular morning, Bell had selected 5 of his most promising athletes for the wilderness training session. Logan Price, 17 years old and a senior, was the team captain and Bell's protégé. Logan stood 5 feet 11 inches tall, with dark hair and intense brown eyes that reflected his serious approach to both running and life. He'd been running varsity since his sophomore year and held the school record in the 3,200-meter run. More than his athletic ability, though, Logan possessed the rare quality of natural leadership that made his teammates want to follow him up the steepest climbs and through the most challenging workouts. Logan came from a working-class family in Missoula's industrial district. His father, Marcus Price, worked as a heavy equipment operator for a local construction company, while his mother, Jennifer, managed the front desk at a downtown medical clinic. Neither parent had attended college, but they'd sacrificed enormously to ensure that Logan and his younger sister, Emma, had opportunities they'd never enjoyed. Logan understood the weight of their sacrifice and carried it with him in everything he did. He'd already been accepted to several Division I programs with partial scholarships, and Bell believed he had the potential to compete at the national level if he continued developing his natural talent and work ethic. Evan Grant, also 17, and Logan's best friend since middle school, represented the other side of Bell's coaching philosophy, the belief that running could transform lives. Evan had struggled with attention deficit disorder throughout his childhood, cycling through medications and behavioral interventions that never seemed to address the root of his restlessness. When he joined the cross-country team as a sophomore, more to spend time with Logan than out of any real interest in running, something had clicked. The rhythm and solitude of long-distance running seemed to quiet the chaos in his mind, and his natural athleticism began to emerge as he dedicated himself to training. Evan stood slightly shorter than Logan at 5 feet 9 inches, but he possessed a compact, powerful build that served him well in shorter distances. His blonde hair was always slightly longer than school regulations technically allowed, and his easy smile and quick wit made him popular with both his teammates and the broader student body. He'd raised his GPA from a 2.3 to a 3.7 during his time on the team, and several smaller colleges had begun recruiting him for their programs. For Evan, running had become more than a sport. It was a form of meditation that helped him navigate the challenges of adolescence and family upheaval. Evan's home life was complicated in ways that Logan's stable, supportive family couldn't fully understand. His parents, David and Catherine Grant, had been going through a contentious divorce for the past 2 years, using their children as weapons in their ongoing battle. Evan had 2 younger brothers, twins named Michael and Matthew, who were freshmen at Roosevelt, and he'd increasingly taken on the role of protecting them from the worst of their parents' conflicts. Running provided him with a healthy outlet for the anger and frustration that threatened to consume him, and Coach Bell had become something of a father figure during this turbulent period of his life. The third member of the group was Samantha Torres, a 16-year-old junior who had emerged as the team's top female distance runner. Sam, as everyone called her, stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with long black hair that she always wore in a tight ponytail during runs. Her parents, Roberto and Maria Torres, had immigrated to Montana from Mexico when Sam was just 3 years old, and they'd worked tirelessly to establish a successful landscaping business in the Missoula area. Sam was the first person in her extended family with realistic prospects of attending college, and she carried that responsibility with the same grace and determination that characterized her running style. Sam possessed the kind of natural running economy that couldn't be taught, an effortless stride that seemed to eat up miles without visible effort. She'd already caught the attention of several Division I coaches, and Bell believed she had the potential to earn a full scholarship if she continued progressing at her current rate. More than her athletic ability, though, Sam brought a steady, calming presence to the team that helped balance some of the more intense personalities among her male teammates. Despite her quiet demeanor, Sam was incredibly tough, both physically and mentally. She regularly trained with the boys and could match them step for step on even the most challenging workouts. Her younger brother, Carlos, was a promising middle-distance runner on the junior varsity team, and Sam had taken on the role of mentoring not just him, but several of the other younger female athletes who looked up to her as a role model. The fourth team member selected for the wilderness training was Marcus Johnson, a 15-year-old sophomore who represented the future of Bell's program. At 6 feet tall but still growing into his frame, Marcus possessed the kind of raw speed and power that suggested he could excel at any distance from the 800 meters to the marathon. He was still learning how to harness his natural abilities, sometimes pushing too hard too early in races, but Bell saw enormous potential in the young athlete. Marcus came from a military family. His father, Sergeant First Class Jerome Johnson, was stationed at nearby Malmstrom Air Force Base, while his mother, Angela, worked as a nurse at the base hospital. The family had been stationed in Montana for the past 3 years, and Marcus had quickly established himself as one of the top young runners in the state. His discipline and work ethic reflected his military upbringing, but he also possessed an infectious enthusiasm that energized his teammates and made even the hardest workouts feel like adventures. The youngest member of the group was Riley Chen, a 14-year-old freshman who had shocked everyone, including himself, by making the varsity squad in just his first season. Riley stood 5 feet 7 inches tall, with a slight build that belied his incredible endurance capacity. His parents, Dr. David Chen and Dr. Lisa Wang Chen, were both professors at the University of Montana, David in the forestry school and Lisa in biochemistry. And they'd initially been skeptical about their son's interest in competitive running, preferring that he focus on his already impressive academic achievements. Riley had a quiet, analytical approach to running that reminded Bell of some of the most successful athletes he'd coached over the years. While other runners might rely on raw talent or competitive fire, Riley studied every aspect of training and racing, keeping detailed logs of his workouts, analyzing his splits, and constantly seeking ways to improve his efficiency and performance. Despite his youth, he'd already established himself as a valuable contributor to the varsity team, and Bell believed he could develop into something truly special over the next 4 years. The plan for their Wednesday morning training session was straightforward and familiar, a route that Bell had been using with his athletes for over 15 years. They would drive approximately 12 miles north of Missoula on Interstate 90, then take the exit for the Rattlesnake Recreation Area. From the main trailhead, they would follow the Rattlesnake Creek Trail for approximately 3 miles before branching off onto the Stewart Peak Trail, a more challenging route that would take them up through dense forest and into the alpine terrain above the valley floor. The total planned distance was roughly 8 miles, with significant elevation gain that would provide an excellent workout for the athletes while exposing them to the kind of varied terrain they might encounter at state championship meets held in mountainous areas. Bell had calculated that the run would take approximately 60 to 75 minutes, depending on pace and rest stops, leaving them plenty of time to complete the workout and return to school before first period began at 10:30 a.m. Bell had obtained all necessary permits for the training session and had filed a detailed route plan with both the school administration and the local Forest Service office, as required by district policy for any outdoor education activities. He'd also confirmed current trail conditions with the Rattlesnake Wilderness Ranger Station, where he'd spoken with Ranger Patricia Hoffman, a 20-year veteran of the Forest Service who knew the area as well as anyone. "Conditions look good for tomorrow morning, Andy," Hoffman had told him during their phone conversation on Tuesday afternoon. "We've had a few bear sightings in the area over the past week, but nothing unusual for this time of year. Just make sure your group stays together and makes plenty of noise. You know the drill." Bear encounters were always a consideration when venturing into the Montana wilderness, but Bell had been leading groups into bear country for 2 decades without incident. He carried bear spray, maintained strict protocols for group management, and ensured that his athletes understood and followed proper wilderness safety procedures. The Rattlesnake Wilderness was home to both black bears and grizzlies, but serious encounters were rare, particularly for groups that followed established safety guidelines. As Bell waited in the school parking lot for his athletes to arrive, he reviewed his mental checklist one final time. He'd packed his standard wilderness kit, first aid supplies, emergency shelter, water purification tablets, a GPS device, a satellite communicator for emergencies, and 2 canisters of bear spray. His cell phone was fully charged, though service would be spotty once they entered the wilderness area. He'd also brought extra energy bars and electrolyte drinks, knowing that the challenging terrain would demand significant energy expenditure from his young athletes. The school van was a 2019 Ford Transit that the athletic department had purchased specifically for transporting teams to outdoor training locations. Bell had personally advocated for features like all-wheel drive and upgraded suspension to handle the rough Forest Service roads they regularly traveled. The vehicle was meticulously maintained and equipped with additional safety features, including a GPS tracking system that allowed school administrators to monitor the location of any team traveling off-site. Logan arrived first at 7:15 a.m., just as Belle had expected. The young athlete had a habit of arriving early for everything, a trait that Belle deeply appreciated and that had earned Logan the respect of his teammates and coaches. Logan emerged from his mother's Honda Civic with his running gear already on: lightweight shorts, a moisture-wicking shirt in the school's blue and gold colors, and the newest model of trail running shoes that he'd purchased with money earned from his part-time job at a local sporting goods store. "Morning, Coach," Logan said, his voice carrying the slight hoarseness that often accompanied early morning conversations. "Perfect weather for getting after it up there." Belle smiled at his team captain's enthusiasm. Even after 3 years of coaching Logan, he was continually impressed by the young man's positive attitude and genuine love for the sport. "Absolutely perfect," Belle agreed. "I checked the weather forecast again this morning. Clear skies, temperature rising from about 45 degrees now to maybe 65 by the time we finish. Light winds from the west. Couldn't ask for better conditions." Evan arrived next, dropped off by his older brother Jake, who worked as a mechanic at one of the local auto dealerships. The family situation continued to be complicated, with both parents working conflicting schedules and often unable or unwilling to coordinate transportation for their children's activities. Jake had stepped up in many ways, taking on responsibilities that should have belonged to his parents, and Belle made a mental note to mention to Evan again that there were resources available if the family needed additional support. "How's everyone doing at home?" Belle asked quietly as Evan gathered his gear from his brother's pickup truck. Evan shrugged, a gesture that Belle had learned conveyed more complex emotions than the teenager was comfortable expressing directly. "Same as always," Evan replied. "But hey, at least we get to go hurt ourselves in the mountains this morning, right?" Belle recognized the deflection for what it was, Evan's way of avoiding difficult conversations about his family situation. As a mandated reporter, Belle was always alert to signs that his athletes might be experiencing problems at home that required intervention. But Evan's situation, while far from ideal, didn't appear to cross the threshold into abuse or neglect. Instead, Belle tried to provide the stability and positive male role modeling that seemed to be missing from other areas of Evan's life. Sam arrived with her father, Roberto, who was driving one of the company trucks from Torres Family Landscaping. Roberto got out to speak briefly with Belle, as he did whenever his daughter was participating in wilderness training sessions. Despite his trust in Belle's leadership and experience, Roberto's parental instincts made him want to personally assess conditions and get reassurance about safety protocols whenever Sam was heading into potentially dangerous terrain. "Buenos dias, Coach Belle," Roberto said, extending his hand for their customary firm handshake. "Samantha tells me you're heading up towards Stewart Peak today." "That's right," Belle confirmed. "Same route we've used several times this season. Weather conditions are ideal, and I spoke with the Forest Service yesterday to confirm current trail conditions. We should have a great training session." Roberto nodded approvingly. He'd grown to deeply respect Belle over the past 2 years, recognizing that the coach genuinely cared about Sam's development, both as an athlete and as a person. "She's been looking forward to this all week," he said. "Sometimes I think she enjoys these mountain runs more than the track workouts." Belle understood exactly what Roberto meant. While track training was essential for developing speed and race tactics, the wilderness runs provided something that couldn't be replicated on an oval, a connection to the natural world that reminded these young athletes why humans had been running across varied terrain for thousands of years. There was something primal and deeply satisfying about navigating challenging trails adapting to changing conditions and pushing through physical discomfort while surrounded by the beauty of the Montana wilderness. Marcus arrived precisely at 7:30 a.m., the exact time Bell had specified when organizing the training session. His punctuality reflected the military precision that characterized many aspects of his life, a trait that Bell found both admirable and occasionally amusing in someone so young. Marcus's mother, Angela, had dropped him off on her way to an early shift at the base hospital, and she waved to Bell from the driver's seat of their family's Toyota 4Runner before pulling away. "Ready for some hill work, Marcus?" Bell asked as the sophomore athlete grabbed his gear from his athletic bag. "Always ready, coach," Marcus replied with the kind of confidence that Bell hoped would carry him through many years of competitive success. "I've been studying the topographic maps of the area we're covering today. The elevation profile looks like it's going to be a good challenge." Bell was impressed, as he often was, by Marcus's analytical approach to training. While some athletes approached workouts with pure instinct and emotion, Marcus combined natural talent with careful preparation and strategic thinking. It was a combination that often produced exceptional results at the highest levels of competition. Riley was the last to arrive, running slightly behind schedule due to what appeared to be a last-minute discussion with his parents about proper safety procedures. Bell could see Dr. David Chen and Dr. Lisa Wang Chen through the windshield of their Subaru Outback, engaged in what looked like an intense conversation with their son. After a few minutes, Riley emerged from the vehicle with his running gear and what appeared to be additional safety equipment that his parents had insisted he carry. "Sorry, I'm a few minutes late, Coach," Riley said as he approached the van. "My parents wanted to review emergency protocols one more time." Bell appreciated the Chen family's caution, even if their academic background sometimes led them to overthink situations that experienced wilderness travelers would consider routine. "No problem at all," Bell replied. "It's always better to take a few extra minutes to make sure everyone's comfortable with the plan." Dr. Chen approached Bell directly, carrying a small day pack that he wanted his son to take on the training run. "I've packed some additional emergency supplies," he explained. "Extra water, energy bars, a basic first aid kit, and a GPS device that Lisa programmed with our home coordinates and emergency contact information." Bell accepted the pack graciously, understanding that allowing Riley's parents to contribute to safety preparations in their own way was important for maintaining their comfort level with his participation in wilderness training. "That's very thoughtful," Bell said. "Extra preparation is never a bad thing in the mountains." By 7:45 a.m., all 5 athletes were present and accounted for, having completed their standard pre-run preparations. Bell conducted a brief equipment check, ensuring that each athlete had appropriate footwear, clothing suitable for changing weather conditions, and adequate hydration. He also reviewed the route one final time, using a topographic map spread across the hood of the van to show the athletes exactly where they would be running and what terrain features they could expect to encounter. "We'll start at the main Rattlesnake trailhead at approximately 4,200 feet elevation," Bell explained, tracing the route with his finger. "The first 3 miles follow Rattlesnake Creek and are relatively flat, with just gentle, rolling terrain. This will serve as our warm-up and allow everyone to settle into a comfortable rhythm before we hit the challenging section." Logan leaned in closer to study the map, his competitive instincts already engaged as he visualized the workout ahead. "What's the elevation gain on the Stewart Peak Trail segment?" he asked. "About 1,400 feet over roughly 2.5 miles, Bell replied. "Nothing extreme, but definitely a good workout. The trail surface varies from packed dirt to loose rock, with a few technical sections that will require careful footing. We'll take it at a conversational pace on the way up, focusing on maintaining good form and efficient movement over varied terrain." Sam studied the map intently, noting the various trail junctions and potential navigation challenges. "Are we running the full loop or turning around at a specific point?" she asked. "We'll turn around when we reach the viewpoint overlooking the Rattlesnake Valley," Bell explained. "That's about 4 miles from the trailhead, which will give us an 8-mile round trip with plenty of elevation gain and varied terrain. The descent will provide good practice for race situations where you need to maintain control and efficiency while managing steep downhill sections." Evan was examining the map symbols that indicated various natural features and potential hazards. "I see there are stream crossings marked along the route," he observed. "Are we expecting any challenges with water levels?" Bell appreciated the thoughtful questions from his athletes, recognizing that their engagement with route planning and risk assessment was an important part of their development as self-sufficient wilderness travelers. "The stream crossings are all straightforward this time of year," he replied. "Snowpack in the high country is average for late May, so water levels are manageable. We might encounter a few muddy sections, but nothing that should cause problems for experienced trail runners." Marcus was studying the map legend and contour lines with the same analytical intensity he brought to all aspects of his training. "The gradient looks pretty consistent on the climb," he noted. "No super steep pitches that would force us to walk." "That's right," Bell confirmed. "One of the reasons I like this route for training is that the grade is challenging but sustainable. You'll definitely feel it in your legs and lungs, but it's entirely runnable for athletes at your fitness level. The key will be pacing yourselves appropriately on the ascent so that you still have energy for a strong finish on the way back down." Riley had been quietly absorbing the route briefing while organizing the additional equipment his parents had provided. "Coach, should we establish predetermined check-in points along the route?" he asked. "My parents suggested that having specific locations where we regroup might be helpful for maintaining group cohesion." Bell nodded approvingly at the suggestion. "Absolutely. We'll regroup at the junction where Rattlesnake Creek Trail meets Stewart Peak Trail. That's about 3 miles in. Then again at the turnaround point, and finally back at the junction on our return trip. That will ensure we stay together as a group and give everyone a chance to hydrate and assess how they're feeling." After completing the route briefing and equipment check, Bell gathered his athletes in a circle for their traditional pre-run team meeting. This ritual had evolved over the years into an important bonding moment that helped establish group cohesion and shared purpose for their training sessions. Bell believed that successful teams were built not just on individual talent and fitness, but on mutual trust, communication, and collective commitment to shared goals. "All right, team," Bell began, looking each athlete in the eye in turn. "Today's workout is about more than just physical conditioning. We're heading into wilderness that demands respect, attention, and teamwork. I want everyone to remember our core principles: stay together, communicate constantly, and look out for each other. If anyone experiences any problems, physical, mental, or otherwise, speak up immediately. No workout is worth risking anyone's safety or well-being." Logan, as team captain, took the lead in the group's response. "Understood, coach. We've got each other's backs out there." "That's right," Bell continued. "I also want to remind everyone about wildlife awareness. This is bear country, and while encounters are rare, we need to maintain proper protocols throughout the run. That means staying together as a group, making noise as we move through dense vegetation, and being alert to our surroundings at all times. I'm carrying bear spray, but our best defense is avoiding situations where we might surprise wildlife." Sam raised her hand slightly. "Coach, what's our protocol if we do encounter a bear or other large wildlife?" Bell had covered this topic numerous times during previous training sessions, but he never minded reviewing safety procedures, especially with younger athletes who were still developing their wilderness experience. "Stop immediately and assess the situation," he replied. "If it's a black bear, make yourself appear large. Speak firmly but calmly, and back away slowly. If it's a grizzly, the protocol is similar, but avoid direct eye contact and be prepared to use defensive tools if necessary. In either case, never run unless you're absolutely certain you can reach safety. Bears can run much faster than humans, and running might trigger their chase instinct. Evan nodded seriously. And if someone gets injured on the trail, we stop, assess the situation, and provide appropriate first aid, Bell replied. I carry a comprehensive medical kit and have wilderness first aid training. For serious injuries, we have the satellite communicator to call for emergency assistance. The most important thing is that everyone stays calm and follows instructions. In 20 years of leading groups in this area, we've never had a serious incident, and I intend to keep that record intact. Marcus was checking his GPS watch, synchronizing it with the satellite constellation to ensure accurate tracking of their route and performance metrics. Coach, are we planning to maintain a specific pace target or running by effort level? Effort level, Bell replied. I want everyone running at a conversational pace on the ascent. You should be able to speak in complete sentences without gasping for breath. The goal is to build aerobic capacity and mental toughness, not to simulate race conditions. Save the speed work for track practice. Riley was making final adjustments to his gear, ensuring that his additional safety equipment was distributed properly in his pack. Should we plan for any specific hydration or nutrition strategies during the run? Good question, Bell replied. The temperature is going to rise as the morning progresses, and the elevation gain will increase your energy expenditure significantly. Plan to drink water at each regrouping point, and don't wait until you feel thirsty. I've got extra electrolyte supplements if anyone needs them, particularly on the climb. With the briefing completed and all questions answered, Bell led his group through their standard dynamic warm-up routine in the school parking lot. The sequence included leg swings, high knees, butt kicks, walking lunges, and several other exercises designed to prepare their muscles and joints for the varied demands of trail running. Even after thousands of training sessions, Bell never skipped this preparation phase, understanding that proper warm-up was essential for both performance and injury prevention. At 8:15 a.m., the team loaded into the van for the drive to the Rattlesnake Recreation Area. Bell had made this trip so many times that he could navigate the route from memory, but he still used GPS to monitor traffic conditions and ensure the most efficient path to their destination. The athletes settled into their usual seating arrangement, Logan and Evan in the back row, Sam and Marcus in the middle, and Riley in the front passenger seat, where he could continue his conversation with Bell about training theory and race strategy. The drive from Roosevelt High School to the Rattlesnake Trailhead took approximately 25 minutes, following Interstate 90 north through the Missoula urban area before exiting onto local roads that wound through increasingly rural and forested terrain. Bell used the travel time to continue building team cohesion, encouraging conversation about upcoming races, summer training plans, and college recruitment activities. Logan, have you made any decisions about official visits? Bell asked, glancing at his team captain in the rearview mirror. I'm planning visits to 3 schools in June, Logan replied. Montana State, Northern Arizona, and Colorado State. All 3 coaches seem genuinely interested, and they each offer different advantages in terms of academic programs and competitive opportunities. Bell nodded approvingly. Logan's recruitment process was proceeding exactly as he'd hoped. Multiple quality options based on both athletic ability and academic achievement. What factors are you weighing most heavily as you make your decision? Honestly, Coach, I'm looking for a program that feels similar to what we have here, Logan replied. Coaches who care about developing the whole person, not just race results. Teammates who support each other and push each other to be better. an academic environment that will prepare me for life after running. That's exactly the right approach, Bell confirmed. Athletic ability will get you recruited, but program culture and coaching philosophy will determine whether you reach your full potential as both an athlete and a person. Evan leaned forward in his seat, engaging in the conversation about post-high school plans. Coach, do you think there might be opportunities for athletes who aren't quite at the Division I level? I mean, smaller schools or different competitive levels? Bell appreciated Evan's realistic self-assessment while also recognizing that his improvement curve suggested he might have more options than he currently realized. Absolutely, Bell replied. Division II, Division III, and NAIA schools all have excellent programs that could be great fits for dedicated athletes. The key is finding a school where you can contribute meaningfully to the team while getting the academic and personal development opportunities you're looking for. Sam was listening to the conversation while gazing out the window at the increasingly wild landscape surrounding their route. What about opportunities for female athletes? She asked. Are the recruitment dynamics different? In some ways, yes, Bell replied honestly. There are fewer total scholarship opportunities in women's distance running, but there's also typically less depth of competition for those spots. Your times and improvement trajectory put you in a very competitive position for quality programs. The key will be identifying coaches and schools that align with your goals and values. Marcus was studying a training log that he maintained in a small notebook, reviewing recent workouts and planning ahead for summer preparation. Coach, what kind of training should we be thinking about during the break between track season and cross-country preparation? Great question, Bell replied. The summer base building phase is crucial for success in cross-country. I'll be providing individualized training plans for everyone who's interested, focusing on aerobic development, strength building, and injury prevention. We'll also have informal group training sessions for those who want to maintain the team connection during the off-season. Riley was examining the topographic features visible through the van's windshield, correlating them with the maps he'd been studying. The terrain complexity is really increasing as we get closer to the wilderness area, he observed. You can see how the valley walls are getting steeper and the forest coverage is becoming more dense. Bell was pleased by Riley's observational skills and geographical awareness. That's exactly right. We're transitioning from the developed valley floor to genuine wilderness terrain. This area has been managed as protected habitat for decades, which is why it maintains such rich biodiversity and natural character. As they turned off the main highway onto the Forest Service Road that led to the Rattlesnake Recreation Area, Bell slowed the van to navigate the increasingly rough and narrow pavement. This final approach to the trailhead always served as a psychological transition for his athletes, helping them shift from their everyday mindset to the focused awareness required for wilderness training. The Forest Service Road wound through dense stands of Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, and western larch, with occasional clearings that provided glimpses of the dramatic mountain terrain they would be exploring during their run. Bell pointed out various natural features and wildlife habitats, continuing his role as both coach and environmental educator. The ecosystem we're entering supports a remarkable diversity of wildlife, Bell explained as they drove. In addition to black bears and grizzlies, this area is home to mountain lions, wolves, elk, deer, and dozens of smaller mammal species. The key to coexisting safely with wildlife is understanding their behavior patterns and respecting their habitat needs. Logan was studying the forest through the van's windows, noting the varying density of vegetation and potential visibility issues. Coach, how do wildlife behavior patterns change during different seasons? Are there times of year when encounters are more likely? Excellent question, Bell replied. Spring and early summer, which is exactly when we're here today, can be particularly active periods. Bears are emerging from hibernation and searching for food sources, while many species are in breeding season or caring for young offspring. That makes them potentially more territorial and less predictable than during other times of year. Evan was listening intently, while also scanning their surroundings with the heightened awareness that came naturally to him during wilderness excursions. What signs should we be watching for that might indicate recent wildlife activity in the area? Tracks, scat, claw marks on trees, disturbed vegetation and carcass remains, Bell replied. We'll be moving at a pace that makes detailed observation challenging, but it's good to maintain general awareness of our environment. If anyone notices anything unusual or potentially concerning, speak up immediately. Sam was thinking about the upcoming run from a tactical perspective, considering how wildlife awareness might affect their pacing and group management strategies. Should we plan to modify our normal running formation to improve visibility and communication? Good thinking, Bell confirmed. We'll run in a tighter group than we might during track workouts, with everyone staying within easy conversational distance. I'll take the lead position, Logan will anchor the back of the group, and everyone else should maintain positions where they can see both the runner ahead and the runner behind. Marcus was reviewing his understanding of wilderness emergency procedures, wanting to ensure he was prepared for any potential scenarios they might encounter. Coach, if we did have to call for emergency assistance, what's the typical response time for rescue services in this area? Bell appreciated Marcus's thorough approach to risk assessment, even as he hoped such knowledge would remain purely theoretical. Response times vary significantly, depending on the nature of the emergency and exact location, he replied. For serious medical emergencies, helicopter evacuation might be possible within 30 to 45 minutes. For less urgent situations requiring ground-based rescue, it could be several hours. That's why prevention and self-sufficiency are always our primary strategies. Riley was correlating their current location with the GPS coordinates he'd programmed into his parents' backup navigation device. We're getting close to the trailhead, he observed. I can see the parking area and facilities ahead. At 8:42 a.m., Bell pulled the van into the Rattlesnake Recreation Area parking lot, selecting a spot that would provide easy access for loading gear after their run, while also ensuring the vehicle would be visible to other wilderness users and Forest Service personnel. The parking area was relatively busy for a Wednesday morning, with approximately a dozen other vehicles belonging to hikers, trail runners and mountain bikers who were taking advantage of the excellent weather conditions. Bell conducted a final vehicle security check, ensuring that all doors were locked and no valuables were visible through the windows. He also placed a trip itinerary on the dashboard that included their planned route, expected return time, and emergency contact information. This standard procedure ensured that if they failed to return as scheduled, search and rescue personnel would have detailed information about where to begin looking for them. The athletes completed their final preparations, adjusting shoes, checking hydration systems, and organizing any personal items they planned to carry during the run. Bell distributed bear bells to each team member, small metallic bells that would provide a constant audio signal to wildlife as they moved through the forest. While opinions varied on the effectiveness of bear bells, Bell considered them a reasonable additional precaution that couldn't cause any harm. Remember, Bell said as he conducted a final equipment check, these bells are just one layer of our wildlife awareness strategy. The most important thing is maintaining group cohesion and vocal communication as we move through areas with limited visibility. Logan was studying the Trailhead Information Board, which displayed current conditions, regulations, and recent wildlife activity reports. Coach, there's a notice here about increased bear activity in the Stewart Peak area within the past week. Should that affect our route selection? Bell joined Logan at the information board to review the posted notices. The bear activity report was dated 3 days earlier and described 2 separate sightings of a grizzly sow with cubs in the general vicinity of their planned route. However, the specific locations mentioned were approximately 2 miles north of their intended turnaround point, and the report included standard recommendations for group behavior rather than any trail closures or specific warnings. "The sightings are far enough from our planned route that I'm comfortable proceeding," Bell decided after reviewing the information carefully. "However, this reinforces the importance of maintaining proper protocols throughout our run. We'll be extra vigilant about making noise and staying together as a tight group." Sam was reading the trail condition report, which indicated that most routes were in good shape despite recent rainfall. "Looks like there might be some muddy sections in the first mile or two," she noted, "but nothing that should significantly affect our pace or safety." Evan was examining the weather forecast posted on the information board, comparing it with the conditions they'd reviewed earlier that morning. "Wind speeds are expected to remain light throughout the morning," he observed. "Temperature should reach the mid-60s by the time we finish, with continued clear skies." Marcus was using the break to hydrate and consume a small energy snack, following the pre-exercise nutrition strategies he'd learned through his systematic approach to training optimization. "Coach, should we plan a specific warm-up routine here at the trailhead, or transition directly into easy running pace?" "Let's do a brief, dynamic warm-up to activate the muscle groups we'll be using most heavily," Bell replied. "The first mile of trail is gentle enough to serve as additional warm-up, but I want everyone's bodies prepared for the demands we'll be placing on them over the next hour and a half." Riley was double-checking his GPS device and emergency communication equipment, ensuring that both were functioning properly and had adequate battery power for the duration of their planned activity. "All systems are operational," he reported with characteristic thoroughness. At 9 a.m. precisely, Bell led his team through the trailhead gate and onto the Rattlesnake Creek Trail. The beginning of the route was well maintained and clearly marked, following a gentle gradient through mixed forest that provided excellent running conditions. The trail surface consisted of packed dirt with occasional root systems and small rocks that required attention but posed no significant technical challenges. Bell set a conversational pace from the start, encouraging his athletes to settle into a rhythm that would be sustainable for the entire workout. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scents of pine, wildflowers, and the rich organic aroma of healthy forest soil. Birdsongs provided a constant soundtrack as they moved deeper into the wilderness, and the team quickly fell into the focused, meditative state that characterized their best wilderness training sessions. "How's everyone feeling so far?" Bell called back to his group after they'd covered the first quarter mile. "Great, Coach," Logan replied from his position at the back of the group. "Pace feels perfect for the early miles." "Legs feel good," Sam added. "The trail surface is really nice through this section." Evan was running easily alongside Marcus, both athletes appearing relaxed and comfortable with the pace and terrain. "Beautiful morning for this," Evan observed. "The light coming through the trees is incredible." Riley was running in his characteristic analytical style, monitoring his heart rate and pace while also observing the natural environment around them. "The trail gradient is very gentle so far," he noted, "probably averaging less than 2% grade." Bell was pleased with his team's positive energy and smooth adaptation to the wilderness environment. After years of coaching the same athletes, he could read their body language and vocal cues to assess how they were handling the physical and mental demands of each workout. This morning, everyone appeared to be starting strong and ready for the challenges ahead. The first mile of trail wound through relatively open forest with good visibility in all directions. Occasional clearings provided glimpses of the dramatic mountain peaks surrounding the Rattlesnake Valley, serving as reminders of the spectacular natural setting for their training session. Bell used these scenic moments to reinforce his athletes' connection to the landscape while also maintaining awareness of their surroundings for safety purposes. "Remember to stay alert to our environment," Bell reminded his team as they passed through a section of dense undergrowth. "This is exactly the kind of terrain where we want to make sure we're making enough noise to avoid surprising wildlife." Logan increased his conversational volume slightly, engaging Marcus in discussion about upcoming track meets and summer training plans. Sam joined the conversation from her position in the middle of the group, while Evan and Riley maintained their own dialogue about technical aspects of trail running and race strategy. The natural conversation between team members served multiple purposes in Bell's coaching philosophy. It helped maintain the appropriate aerobic intensity for base-building training, provided psychological benefits through social connection, and ensured that the group was generating sufficient noise to alert wildlife to their presence. As they approached the end of the first mile, Bell could see the trail junction ahead, where Rattlesnake Creek Trail continued straight, while the Stewart Peak Trail branched off to the right and began climbing more steeply toward their destination. This junction represented the end of their warm-up phase and the beginning of the more challenging portion of their workout. "Regrouping point coming up," Bell announced to his team. "We'll take a minute to hydrate and check in with everyone before starting the climb." The athletes naturally slowed their pace as they approached the trail junction, transitioning smoothly from running to walking as they gathered in a tight group around the wooden trail sign that marked the intersection. Bell used this opportunity to conduct a quick assessment of each athlete's condition and readiness for the more demanding terrain ahead. "How's everyone feeling?" Bell asked, looking each athlete in the eye to gauge their honest response. "Feeling strong," Logan replied. "Ready for the climb." "Good to go," Sam confirmed, taking a long drink from her hydration system. Evan was stretching his calves against the trail signpost, showing no signs of fatigue or discomfort. "Legs feel great." The pace through that first section was perfect. Marcus was monitoring his heart rate recovery, noting how quickly his pulse dropped during the brief walking break. "Cardiovascular system is responding well." "Ready for the next phase." Riley was studying the trail map posted at the junction, correlating their current position with his GPS device and the route plan they'd discussed earlier. "We're right on schedule," he reported. "The next section gains about 800 feet over the next mile and a half." Bell was satisfied with his team's condition and attitude as they prepared to tackle the most challenging portion of their workout. The transition from the gentle creek trail to the steeper mountain terrain would test their fitness, mental toughness, and technical trail running skills. But everyone appeared ready for the challenge. "All right, team," Bell said as they prepared to resume running. "The next section is where we really start working. Remember to maintain conversational pace even as the gradient increases. If you find yourself breathing too hard to speak in complete sentences, slow down slightly. The goal is aerobic development, not anaerobic suffering." At 9:14 a.m., the team turned onto the Stewart Peak Trail and began the sustained climb that would take them up through increasingly wild and challenging terrain toward their turnaround point. The trail immediately became more technical, with loose rocks, exposed roots, and steeper gradients that demanded greater attention to foot placement and running efficiency. Bell adjusted his position to maintain visual contact with all 5 athletes as they spread out slightly in response to the more demanding terrain. Logan continued to anchor the back of the group, ensuring that no one fell behind or experienced problems without immediate support. The team's formation remained tight enough for easy communication, while allowing each runner to find their optimal line through the technical sections. The forest canopy became denser as they climbed, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere with filtered sunlight streaming through the branches above. The understory vegetation grew thicker and more varied, including berry bushes, ferns, and wildflowers that added visual interest, but also reduced visibility beyond the immediate trail corridor. "This is the kind of terrain where wildlife encounters become more likely," Bell called back to his team. "Stay alert and keep talking to each other." Sam was running smoothly behind Bell, her natural trail running ability evident in the way she navigated technical sections without breaking rhythm or wasting energy on unnecessary movements. "The forest is really beautiful through this section," she observed, maintaining her part of the group conversation. Evan was working slightly harder than on the gentler terrain, but still appeared comfortable and controlled. "The grade is definitely noticeable," he noted, "but it's a good climbing rhythm." Marcus was analyzing the technical demands of the trail, adapting his stride and foot strike patterns to optimize efficiency over the varied surface conditions. "The mix of terrain features is great training for championship-level courses," he observed. Riley was monitoring his exercise intensity carefully, using both physiological feedback and technology to ensure he was maintaining the appropriate effort level for the training objectives. "Heart rate is right in the target zone for aerobic development," he reported. Bell was pleased with how his athletes were adapting to the increased demands of the mountain terrain. Their conversation remained natural and unforced, indicating that they were managing the intensity appropriately while still challenging themselves meaningfully. This balance was crucial for maximizing the training benefits while minimizing injury risk and mental burnout. The trail continued climbing steadily through increasingly dramatic terrain, with occasional switchbacks that provided brief respites from the sustained gradient. Each turn revealed new vistas of the surrounding wilderness, reminding the athletes of their privileged position in one of Montana's most spectacular natural environments. As they reached approximately 2 miles from the trailhead, Bell noticed that the forest around them had become noticeably quieter. The bird songs that had provided constant background noise during the earlier portion of their run had diminished significantly, and even the usual sounds of small mammals moving through the underbrush seemed muted. His years of wilderness experience had taught him to pay attention to such environmental changes, as they sometimes indicated the presence of large predators in the area. Bell slowed his pace slightly, ostensibly to allow his athletes to close up their formation, but actually to give himself more time to assess their surroundings and determine whether the unusual quiet represented a cause for concern. He scanned the forest on both sides of the trail, looking for any signs of recent wildlife activity or disturbance that might explain the change in ambient noise levels. "Let's tighten up the group a bit," Bell called back to his athletes, using a casual tone that wouldn't alarm them unnecessarily. "The trail gets more technical through the next section." Logan responded immediately to Bell's instruction, encouraging the other athletes to close the gaps between runners while maintaining their conversational pace. As team captain, Logan had learned to recognize the subtle cues that indicated when Bell wanted the group to pay increased attention to safety protocols without creating unnecessary anxiety. Sam moved up slightly behind Bell, her experienced trail runner's instincts also detecting the subtle changes in their environment. "The forest does seem quieter through this section," she observed quietly, confirming Bell's assessment without alarming the younger athletes. Evan and Marcus were focused on the technical demands of the increasingly challenging trail surface, working harder than before, but still maintaining good form and reasonable conversation. Riley continued monitoring their progress against the planned route timeline, noting that they were actually moving slightly faster than Bell's estimated pace, despite the steepening terrain. At 9:28 a.m., as the team crested a small ridge approximately 2.5 miles from the trailhead, Bell's peripheral vision caught a flash of movement in the dense forest, about 50 yards off the trail to their left. He immediately raised his left hand in the universal signal for the group to stop, while simultaneously reaching for the bear spray canister attached to his waist belt. "Everyone stop and stay exactly where you are," Bell said in a calm but authoritative voice that immediately captured his athletes' complete attention. "Don't move, don't speak, and follow my lead." The 5 teenagers froze instantly, their training in wilderness protocols overriding their natural curiosity about what Bell had observed. Logan, Sam, Evan, Marcus, and Riley remained motionless on the trail, their eyes fixed on their coach as he slowly scanned the forest around them and assessed whatever threat he had detected. Bell's heart rate spiked as he confirmed what his peripheral vision had initially registered: a large grizzly bear, approximately 200 yards away and moving roughly parallel to their position. The animal appeared to be following a game trail that intersected their running route at several points ahead, suggesting that an encounter was not only possible, but likely if they continued forward along their planned path. The bear was a mature female, probably weighing close to 400 pounds, with the distinctive shoulder hump and light-colored fur tips that identified her species unmistakably. Her body language suggested focused movement toward a specific destination rather than random foraging behavior, which could indicate that she was traveling with cubs or responding to a territorial concern that made her potentially more dangerous than a solitary animal. Bell's mind rapidly processed multiple factors as he developed a response plan. They were approximately halfway to their planned turnaround point, in an area with limited visibility and multiple trail junctions that could complicate navigation if they needed to alter their route. His satellite communicator could summon emergency assistance, but rescue response times would be measured in hours rather than minutes, making immediate self-reliance their primary option. The bear had not yet shown any signs of awareness of their presence, continuing to move through the forest with the purposeful gait of an animal pursuing its own agenda. Bell knew that their best chance of avoiding a confrontation was to retreat quietly along the path they had already traveled, putting distance between themselves and the potentially dangerous wildlife while moving toward familiar terrain and emergency resources. "We're going to turn around very slowly and head back the way we came," Bell whispered to his athletes, his voice barely audible but carrying absolute authority. "Move like you're in slow motion, no sudden movements, no noise, and stay exactly in the formation we're in right now." Logan, as the experienced team captain, immediately understood the seriousness of the situation and began implementing Bell's instructions without question or hesitation. He carefully rotated his body to face back down the trail, moving with deliberate precision that demonstrated his understanding of wilderness safety protocols. Sam, Evan, Marcus, and Riley followed Logan's example, each athlete turning slowly and carefully to reverse their direction while maintaining the tight group formation that Bell had specified. Their years of training under Bell's leadership had prepared them to respond to unexpected challenges with discipline and teamwork, qualities that were now being tested in a genuinely dangerous situation. Bell maintained his position at what was now the rear of the group, keeping visual contact with the bear while his athletes began their careful retreat. The animal continued moving through the forest, apparently unaware of their presence, but following a trajectory that would bring her increasingly close to their trail if they had continued their original route. The team began moving back down the trail at a pace that Bell estimated would minimize noise while still creating distance between themselves and the potential threat. Every step required careful attention to foot placement, as loose rocks or snapping branches could alert the bear to their presence and potentially trigger a defensive or aggressive response. For approximately 200 yards, their retreat proceeded smoothly, with the athletes demonstrating remarkable discipline and composure under circumstances that would have tested the nerves of much more experienced wilderness travelers. Bell began to feel cautiously optimistic that they would be able to reach safer terrain without incident, potentially turning a dangerous encounter into a valuable learning experience about wilderness awareness and risk management. However, at 9:31 a.m., their carefully controlled retreat was interrupted by the sound of breaking branches and heavy footsteps in the forest, approximately 100 yards behind them, in the direction they were now heading. Bell immediately signaled for another halt, his worst fears being realized as he processed the implications of wildlife movement both ahead of and behind their current position. Through the forest canopy, Bell caught glimpses of a second large bear, this one moving more rapidly and aggressively than the first animal they had encountered. The bear's body language suggested agitation or alarm, possibly in response to detecting their scent or movement, and its trajectory indicated that it was approaching their trail position from a different angle than the first animal. Bell's years of wilderness experience had taught him that encountering multiple bears in close proximity often indicated a sow with grown cubs, a territorial dispute between competing animals, or feeding activity around a carcass. All scenarios that significantly increased the danger level for human travelers caught in the area. Their carefully planned retreat was now compromised, leaving them with limited options and rapidly diminishing time to implement an effective response strategy. "Everyone move off the trail to the right and get behind that fallen log," Bell whispered urgently, pointing to a large deadfall approximately 20 feet from their current position. "Move quickly but quietly and get as low as you can." The athletes responded instantly to Bell's command, abandoning the trail and scrambling toward the natural shelter he had identified. Logan led the movement, helping Sam navigate the rough terrain, while Evan assisted Marcus and Riley in reaching the protective cover of the fallen tree. Bell remained standing for several additional seconds, attempting to assess the positions and movements of both bears, while his athletes established defensive positions. His bear spray was now in his hand, safety removed and ready for immediate deployment, though he understood that the effective range of such defensive tools was limited, and their success would depend on proper timing and favorable wind conditions. The first bear, which they had initially been retreating from, had apparently detected their presence and altered her movement pattern to investigate their location more directly. Bell could see her approximately 150 yards away, moving through the forest with increased speed and attention that suggested she was tracking their scent trail. The second bear, approaching from their original retreat direction, was now clearly visible through the trees and moving with the kind of determined gait that Bell recognized as potentially aggressive behavior. This animal appeared to be slightly smaller than the first, but its agitated demeanor and rapid approach suggested it posed an equal or greater immediate threat to their safety. Bell quickly joined his athletes behind the fallen log, crouching low while maintaining visual contact with both approaching animals through gaps in the surrounding vegetation. His mind rapidly reviewed everything he knew about grizzly bear behavior, defensive strategies, and emergency protocols, while simultaneously considering the welfare of 5 young people whose safety was his absolute responsibility. "Stay as low as you can and don't make any noise," Bell whispered to his athletes. "I need everyone to follow my instructions exactly, no matter what happens next." Logan was positioned closest to Bell, his athletic training and natural leadership instincts helping him maintain composure despite the obvious danger of their situation. "What do you need us to do, Coach?" he whispered back, his voice steady and controlled. "If I tell you to run, head straight down the trail toward the parking area as fast as you can," Bell replied quietly. "Don't look back. Don't wait for anyone else. Just get to safety and call for help. If I use the bear spray, cover your faces and stay down until I tell you to move." Sam was lying flat behind the log, her slight frame making her nearly invisible among the forest debris and undergrowth. Her experience with outdoor activities had prepared her mentally for unexpected challenges, and she remained focused on Belle's instructions rather than allowing fear to compromise her judgment. Evan was controlling his breathing carefully, using techniques he had learned for managing pre-race anxiety to maintain his composure during the genuinely life-threatening situation they now faced. His troubled home life had given him experience with high-stress situations, though nothing approaching the immediate physical danger they were now confronting. Marcus was applying the mental discipline of his military upbringing to remain calm and ready to follow instructions, regardless of how dangerous or frightening their circumstances became. His systematic approach to challenges served him well as he focused on being prepared for whatever actions Belle might require of them. Riley was fighting against his natural analytical tendencies, which wanted to process and understand every aspect of their situation, instead forcing himself to simply trust Belle's expertise and remain ready to respond immediately to whatever commands their coach might issue. At 9:33 a.m., the situation escalated dramatically as both bears converged on their position from different directions, apparently drawn by human scent and the movement they had detected during the team's attempt to find protective cover. The first bear, the larger female, approached to within approximately 75 yards before stopping and raising her head to test the air with her highly sensitive nose. Belle could see the animal's ears rotating as she processed various sensory inputs, trying to locate the exact position and nature of the potential threat she had detected. Her body posture indicated high alertness, but not necessarily immediate aggression, suggesting that defensive behavior might still be possible if they could avoid triggering her protective instincts. The second bear, however, was displaying much more concerning behavior patterns. This animal continued approaching their position with apparent determination, showing none of the cautious assessment behaviors that might indicate a willingness to avoid confrontation. Belle estimated that this bear would reach their defensive position within 2 or 3 minutes, forcing a direct encounter that could easily turn violent. Belle made the critical decision that their defensive position behind the fallen log was no longer sustainable, as they were about to be caught between two potentially aggressive animals with limited escape routes available. Their only viable option was to implement an aggressive defensive strategy that might intimidate or distract the bears long enough for his athletes to reach safer terrain. "When I count to 3, everyone stand up and make as much noise as possible," Belle whispered to his team. "Yell, clap your hands, wave your arms, and look as large and intimidating as you can. Do not run unless I specifically tell you to run. Ready?" The athletes prepared themselves for what they understood might be their most important performance ever, gathering their courage and focus for a coordinated defensive display that could determine whether they survived the encounter or became victims of a wilderness tragedy that would make headlines across the region. "One," Belle whispered, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the mortal danger they faced. Logan, Sam, Evan, Marcus, and Riley tensed their muscles and prepared their voices for the coordinated intimidation display that represented their best chance for survival. "Two," Belle continued, his eyes tracking both bears as they continued converging on the team's position from different angles, their massive frames and powerful muscles representing a level of physical threat that none of the humans could match through strength alone. "3," Belle commanded, and 6 human voices exploded into the wilderness air with a volume and intensity that shattered the forest quiet and announced their presence to every living creature within a mile radius. Bell and his athletes rose simultaneously from their concealment, waving their arms above their heads and generating a cacophony of sounds designed to convince the approaching bears that they represented a large, unified, and potentially dangerous group rather than vulnerable prey animals. Their voices cracked with adrenaline and fear, but they maintained the coordinated display that Bell had trained them to execute in exactly such circumstances. The larger female bear immediately responded to their defensive demonstration by stopping her approach and rearing up on her hind legs to assess this new development. Standing at her full height of nearly 8 feet, she represented a truly imposing presence that tested the courage of even Bell's most experienced athletes, but her body language suggested uncertainty rather than immediate aggression. However, the second bear reacted to their noise and movement with what Bell instantly recognized as defensive aggression triggered by territorial protective instincts. Instead of retreating or showing signs of intimidation, this animal accelerated its approach while displaying the flattened ears, lowered head posture, and rapid jaw movements that indicated an impending attack. "Run now!" Bell shouted to his athletes, abandoning their defensive position as he realized that intimidation tactics had failed, and their only remaining option was immediate evacuation toward the relative safety of more open terrain and potential rescue resources. Logan responded instantly to Bell's command, grabbing Sam's hand and pulling her toward the trail at a sprint pace that would have been impressive under normal circumstances, but seemed desperately slow given the speed at which several 100 pounds of muscle and claws were pursuing them through the forest. Evan, Marcus, and Riley followed immediately, their competitive athletic training serving them well as they transitioned from defensive postures to all-out flight in the space of seconds. None of them looked back to assess the bear's response to their movement, understanding that every fraction of a second could be crucial in reaching terrain where they might have some advantage over their pursuing predators. Bell deployed his bear spray toward the charging animal while simultaneously beginning his own retreat, hoping that the chemical deterrent might slow or discourage the attack long enough for his athletes to gain additional distance. The spray created a visible cloud of irritant that the bear encountered at approximately 40 yards from their position, causing the animal to shake its head and paw at its face, but not significantly altering its aggressive pursuit. The team's desperate flight down the mountain trail became a terrifying race between human endurance and conditioning against the raw speed and power of 2 grizzly bears that had apparently decided these intruders represented a threat serious enough to warrant elimination. Bell's years of wilderness experience had prepared him for many scenarios, but nothing had quite matched the intensity of leading 5 teenagers through a life-or-death chase across technically challenging terrain, while 2 of North America's most dangerous predators pursued them. Logan maintained his grip on Sam's hand as they descended the trail at speeds that would have been reckless under normal circumstances, but which now represented their only chance for survival. His natural leadership qualities emerged even in crisis as he chose lines through the technical sections that would be safest for Sam while maintaining the pace necessary to stay ahead of their pursuers. "Stay with me," Logan shouted to Sam over the sounds of their heavy breathing and pounding footsteps. "We can do this. We're almost to the easier terrain." Sam's natural trail-running ability served her well during the desperate descent as she navigated root systems, loose rocks, and steep gradients with the efficiency that came from years of training on challenging terrain. Her smaller frame actually provided some advantage in the technical sections, allowing her to change direction quickly and maintain balance through sequences that challenged her larger teammates. Evan was running behind Logan and Sam, his competitive instincts and natural athleticism combining to produce a performance that exceeded anything he had achieved during formal competition. The life-or-death stakes seemed to unlock physical reserves that he hadn't known existed, and his familiarity with the trail from their ascent helped him anticipate the most challenging sections. Marcus was applying the mental toughness of his military upbringing to maintain his pace despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm his rational thinking. His systematic approach to challenges helped him break the desperate run into manageable segments, focusing on reaching the next visible landmark rather than contemplating the full distance they needed to cover. Riley was drawing on analytical skills even during the crisis, processing information about terrain, pace, and distance that helped him optimize his effort distribution for what he understood would be a sustained maximum effort over varied and challenging ground. His smaller stature required him to work harder to match the pace of his larger teammates, but his natural endurance capacity kept him competitive in the group. Bell was running at the rear of the group, periodically glancing back to assess the distance between his athletes and their pursuers, while also monitoring the condition and pace of each team member. His coaching experience helped him recognize the signs of athletes approaching their physical limits, and he understood that their survival might depend on his ability to help them maintain an unsustainable pace for whatever time was required to reach safety. The bears had initially maintained their pursuit as the team fled down the mountain. But Bell noticed that the larger female had stopped her chase after approximately 300 yards and was no longer visible through the forest behind them. This development provided some relief as it reduced their immediate threats from 2 animals to 1, but the remaining bear continued its aggressive pursuit with apparently undiminished determination. At 9:37 a.m., after approximately 4 minutes of desperate flight down the mountain trail, tragedy struck the Roosevelt High School track team with sudden and devastating impact. Evan Grant, running at his maximum sustainable pace while monitoring the terrain ahead for optimal footing, failed to notice a partially concealed root system that crossed the trail at an oblique angle. Evan's right foot caught the hidden obstacle at the worst possible moment in his stride cycle, sending him tumbling forward onto the rocky trail surface with enough force to cause immediate and serious injury. The sound of his impact with the ground was audible to his teammates, even over their own labored breathing and pounding footsteps, and Logan immediately recognized that their desperate retreat had been compromised by circumstances beyond anyone's control. "Evan's down!" Logan shouted to Bell, immediately stopping his own forward progress and turning back to assist his fallen teammate, despite the mortal danger that continued pursuing them through the forest. Sam stopped alongside Logan, her competitive athlete's instincts overriding self-preservation as she joined the effort to help Evan, despite knowing that the delay might cost all of them their lives. Marcus and Riley also halted their flight, the team's collective loyalty and training creating an automatic response to support a teammate in crisis, regardless of personal risk. Bell reached Evan's position within seconds of the fall, immediately assessing the extent of his injuries, while simultaneously monitoring the forest behind them for signs of their approaching pursuer. Evan was conscious but clearly in significant pain, with obvious signs of trauma to his right leg and possible head injury from the impact with the trail surface. "My leg!" Evan gasped, his face pale with pain and shock. "I can't stand on it." "I think it's broken." Bell's wilderness first aid training immediately engaged as he evaluated Evan's condition and considered their extremely limited options. The pursuing bear was still approaching their position, eliminating the possibility of proper injury assessment and treatment. They had perhaps 60 to 90 seconds before the animal would reach them, forcing a decision between abandoning Evan or attempting to defend their position against a predator that outweighed any of them by hundreds of pounds. "Logan, Sam, help me get Evan up," Bell commanded, making the instantaneous decision that they would not abandon their teammate regardless of the personal cost. "Marcus, Riley, grab rocks or sticks or anything you can use as weapons. We're making our stand here." The team responded to Bell's leadership with the kind of coordinated effort that had characterized their most successful athletic performances, but the stakes now involved life and death rather than medals and trophies. Logan and Sam carefully lifted Evan from the trail surface while Marcus and Riley scavenged for natural weapons among the forest debris surrounding their position. At 9:38 a.m., the pursuing grizzly bear emerged from the forest, approximately 50 yards uphill from their position, its massive frame and aggressive posture eliminating any remaining hope that intimidation tactics might resolve the encounter peacefully. The animal's breathing was audible even at that distance, and its small eyes were focused intently on the group of humans who had invaded its territory and then attempted to flee from its authority. Bell positioned himself between the approaching bear and his injured athlete, holding his remaining canister of bear spray while understanding that their chances of survival had become minimal with Evan's inability to continue their retreat. His mind rapidly processed final contingency plans while his athletes demonstrated the kind of courage and loyalty that would define their legacy, regardless of the encounter's ultimate outcome. "Whatever happens," Bell said quietly to his athletes, "you've all shown the kind of character that makes me proud to be your coach. Stay together, follow my lead, and remember that we're a team." Logan was supporting most of Evan's weight while scanning their surroundings for any possible escape routes or defensive advantages that might improve their odds of survival. His natural leadership qualities emerged even in crisis, as he prepared to sacrifice himself if necessary to give his teammates and coach any additional chance of surviving the encounter. "We've got your back, coach," Logan replied, his voice steady despite the terror of their circumstances. "Tell us what you need us to do." The grizzly bear continued its approach, closing the distance between itself and the group with the deliberate confidence of an apex predator that understood its overwhelming physical advantages over the humans who had challenged its territorial authority. At 30 yards, the animal's individual features became clearly visible: scarred muzzle, massive claws, and intelligent eyes that seemed to assess each member of the group as it planned its attack strategy. Bell raised his bear spray canister, waiting for the optimal moment to deploy the chemical deterrent, while knowing that success would require perfect timing, favorable wind conditions, and a significant amount of luck that they had already exhausted during their desperate flight down the mountain. "Get ready," Bell warned his athletes as the bear approached the effective range of his defensive spray. "When I deploy this, everyone move toward the trail junction we passed, about 200 yards back. Don't wait to see if it works. Just run." At 9:39 a.m., when the grizzly bear had approached to within approximately 15 yards of their position, Bell activated his bear spray, creating a dense cloud of chemical irritant between his group and the attacking animal. The spray deployment was textbook perfect, creating maximum coverage while accounting for wind direction and the bear's approach angle. However, the bear's momentum and aggressive mindset proved too powerful for the chemical deterrent to stop completely. While the spray caused the animal obvious discomfort, shaking its massive head and pawing at its eyes, it continued its charge toward the group with only momentarily reduced speed and coordination. "Run now!" Bell shouted as he realized that his defensive spray had provided only seconds of additional time rather than the complete deterrent effect they desperately needed. Logan and Sam began moving Evan toward the trail as quickly as possible given his injury, but their pace was necessarily slow and would clearly be insufficient to escape the bear's attack range. Marcus and Riley flanked the group with their improvised weapons, understanding that they were about to face a physical confrontation that would test their courage, teamwork, and will to survive against overwhelming odds. The bear emerged from the chemical cloud with renewed aggression, its irritation from the spray apparently intensifying rather than diminishing its determination to eliminate what it perceived as threats to its territory. Bell stepped directly into the animal's path, positioning himself to absorb the initial attack while giving his athletes additional seconds to establish distance or defensive positions. At 9:40 a.m., the grizzly bear made contact with coach Andrew Bell, striking him with sufficient force to send his 6'2" frame tumbling across the trail surface like a discarded piece of equipment. The impact was audible to his athletes from 20 yards away, a sickening combination of crushing force and human vulnerability that would haunt their memories for the remainder of their lives. Bell's body struck a large boulder adjacent to the trail with an impact that rendered him immediately unconscious, eliminating his ability to provide further leadership or protection for the 5 teenagers who now faced the full fury of several hundred pounds of muscle, claws, and predatory instinct without any adult supervision or guidance. Logan immediately made the decision that would define him for the rest of his life, releasing his support of Evan and charging directly toward the bear that was beginning to maul their motionless coach. His competitive athlete's body responded with speed and power that surprised even him as he covered the distance between safety and mortal danger in less than 3 seconds. "Hey! Over here!" Logan shouted at the bear, grabbing a fallen branch approximately 4 feet long and swinging it with all his strength against the animal's heavily muscled shoulder. The impact produced a solid thud, but had no apparent effect on the bear's attack, serving only to redirect its attention toward this new threat. The grizzly bear turned toward Logan with the kind of explosive speed that made its previous movements seem slow and deliberate by comparison. Logan found himself staring directly into small, intelligent eyes that held no compassion, mercy, or recognition of his humanity, only the focused intensity of a predator evaluating its next victim. Sam had lowered Evan to a sitting position against a tree and was now moving to support Logan's desperate attempt to distract the bear from their fallen coach. Her natural athleticism and trail running experience allowed her to navigate the rough terrain quickly while maintaining her balance and control. "Sam, no!" Evan called out despite his pain and injury, understanding that her intervention would likely result in multiple casualties rather than saving anyone's life. Marcus and Riley were approaching from different angles, their improvised weapons ready for use, despite their understanding that they were attempting to fight an animal that could kill any of them with a single swipe of its massive paws. Their athletic training and competitive experiences had prepared them to push through fear and physical challenges, but nothing had prepared them for the reality of hand-to-hand combat with one of North America's most dangerous predators. The bear's attention was now focused entirely on Logan, who stood his ground with remarkable courage, while understanding that his chances of survival were essentially zero. His mind flashed through memories of his parents, his sister Emma, his college recruitment opportunities, and all the future experiences he would never have the chance to enjoy. "I love you all," Logan said quietly to his teammates, his voice carrying across the small clearing where their lives were about to change forever. At 9:41 a.m., the grizzly bear attacked Logan Price with the full fury of its natural predatory capabilities, striking the 17-year-old team captain with claws that opened devastating wounds across his chest and shoulder, while simultaneously using its massive weight and momentum to drive him to the ground where its jaws could complete the deadly assault. Logan's athletic conditioning and mental toughness allowed him to remain conscious during the initial phase of the attack, enabling him to continue shouting instructions and encouragement to his teammates, even as his own life ebbed away on the forest floor. His final words were characteristic of the leadership and selflessness that had made him beloved by everyone who knew him. "Take care of each other," Logan managed to say before the bear's second attack eliminated his ability to speak or move or breathe or dream of the future that would now never arrive. Sam reached Logan's position just as the bear was beginning its final assault on the team captain, arriving in time to witness the moment when a promising young life was extinguished by forces far beyond human control or understanding. The sight of Logan's motionless body triggered something primal in Sam's competitive nature, transforming her grief and terror into focused rage that temporarily overrode her survival instincts. "Get away from him!" Sam screamed at the bear, grabbing a sharp piece of granite from the trail surface and hurling it with all her strength at the animal's head. The rock struck the bear's skull with enough force to get its attention, causing it to raise its massive head from Logan's body and fix its predatory gaze on this new source of interference. Marcus and Riley reached the scene simultaneously, their improvised weapons raised and their young faces displaying the kind of desperate courage that emerges only in life-or-death situations. Marcus wielded a broken tree branch, approximately 5 feet long, while Riley had found a jagged piece of deadfall that he gripped like a spear, despite having no training or experience in such primitive combat techniques. "We need to stay together," Marcus shouted to Sam and Riley, his military upbringing providing tactical thinking even in the midst of overwhelming terror. "Don't let it separate us, or we're all dead." The grizzly bear rose to its full height, towering over the 3 teenagers who had dared to challenge its dominance over this wilderness territory. Blood from both Coach Bell and Logan Price stained its massive paws and muzzle, providing graphic evidence of the violence it was capable of inflicting on the human intruders who had disturbed its domain. Riley was fighting against every analytical instinct in his nature, forcing himself to act on pure adrenaline rather than attempting to process the impossibility of their situation through rational thought. His slight frame and academic background had never prepared him for physical confrontation of any kind, yet he found himself preparing to engage in hand-to-hand combat with an apex predator that outweighed him by several hundred pounds. "Coach Bell is still breathing," Sam observed during a brief moment when the bear's attention was focused on assessing the 3 young humans who continued to threaten its authority. "If we can distract it long enough, maybe he'll regain consciousness and be able to help us." Marcus nodded toward their fallen coach while maintaining his defensive stance, with the tree branch held like a quarterstaff. "We need to create enough space and time for him to recover. Even if he's badly hurt, he's our only chance of getting out of this alive." The bear began moving toward them with the deliberate, confident pace of a predator that understood its overwhelming advantages over prey animals that posed no realistic threat to its safety. Its small eyes seemed to be calculating which of the 3 teenagers would be easiest to eliminate first, while its massive muscles rippled beneath fur that was now stained with the blood of their teammates. At 9:42 a.m., the situation deteriorated further, as Evan Grant's condition began declining rapidly due to blood loss and possible internal injuries from his fall during their desperate flight down the mountain. His consciousness was fading in and out, and his voice was becoming weaker as shock set in from both his physical trauma and the psychological impact of witnessing the violent deaths of his coach and best friend. "I can't feel my legs," Evan whispered from his position against the tree where Sam had left him for safety. "Everything's getting dark. I think I'm dying." Sam heard Evan's words despite her focus on the approaching bear, and the realization that they were losing another teammate intensified her determination to somehow survive this encounter and get help for the injured boy who had been like a brother to her throughout their years of training together. "You're not dying," Sam called back to Evan without taking her eyes off the bear. "We're going to get through this and get you to a hospital. Just hold on a little longer." Dew, the grizzly bear, was now within 10 feet of their defensive position, close enough that they could smell its musky odor and see the individual scars that marked its face and shoulders from previous fights with other predators or territorial disputes with rival bears. Its breathing was audible and regular, showing no signs of exertion or stress, despite having killed 2 humans and pursued 5 others across challenging mountain terrain. Marcus stepped forward slightly, positioning himself as the primary target in hopes of drawing the bear's attack away from Sam and Riley, who were smaller and potentially more vulnerable to the animal's devastating claws and crushing bite force. His military family background had instilled values of service and sacrifice that now manifested in his willingness to place himself at maximum risk for the benefit of his teammates. "When it comes for me, you two run back toward Evan, and then keep going down the trail," Marcus said quietly to Sam and Riley. "Don't look back. Don't try to help me. Just get yourselves and Evan to safety if you can carry him." Riley shook his head firmly, his analytical nature having calculated that their only chance of survival lay in collective defense rather than individual sacrifice. "We stay together, or we all die separately. Those are our only choices now." The bear paused its approach at approximately 8 feet from their position, raising its head to test the air with its sensitive nose, while simultaneously assessing the defensive capabilities of the 3 young humans who continued to challenge its territorial authority. This momentary hesitation provided a brief opportunity for Sam to glance back toward Coach Bell, who appeared to be showing signs of returning consciousness. "Coach Bell is moving," Sam whispered urgently to Marcus and Riley. "I think he's starting to wake up." Indeed, Bell was beginning to regain awareness of his surroundings, though his head injury and the trauma of the bear's initial attack had left him disoriented and struggling to understand the situation developing around him. His years of wilderness experience and coaching responsibility began reasserting themselves as his vision cleared and he recognized the mortal danger facing his remaining athletes. Bell attempted to sit up, despite the severe pain from what he suspected were multiple broken ribs and possibly internal injuries from his impact with the boulder. His movement caught the bear's attention, causing the animal to glance between the adult human who had been its first victim and the 3 teenagers who were maintaining their defensive formation with primitive weapons. "Stay together," Bell managed to say, his voice weak, but carrying the authority that had guided his athletes through thousands of training sessions and competitive challenges. "Back toward trail, slowly." The bear's moment of indecision created an opportunity that Sam immediately recognized and acted upon, despite her lack of experience in wilderness survival situations. She began moving slowly backward while maintaining eye contact with the animal, using the body language techniques that Bell had taught them for dealing with aggressive wildlife encounters. Marcus and Riley followed Sam's lead, maintaining their defensive positions while gradually creating distance between themselves and the bear. Their movement was controlled and deliberate, avoiding the sudden motions that might trigger the animal's chase instincts, while steadily increasing their proximity to terrain that might offer better defensive options or escape routes. The grizzly bear watched their retreat with apparent confusion about whether to pursue them, investigate the adult human who was showing signs of recovery, or simply claim its territory by remaining in place. This behavioral uncertainty provided the teenagers with precious seconds of reduced immediate threat, while they continued their careful withdrawal toward their injured teammate. "Evan, can you hear me?" Sam called softly to their fallen teammate as they approached his position. "We're coming to get you, but you need to stay awake and help us if you can." Evan's response was barely audible, but his eyes were open and tracking their movement, indicating that he retained enough consciousness to potentially assist in his own evacuation if they could devise a method for moving him safely. His leg injury would prevent normal walking, but he might be able to help support some of his own weight, if they could get him upright. At 9:44 a.m., Coach Bell successfully regained enough coordination to reach his feet, though his movements were unsteady and his breathing labored from what were clearly serious internal injuries. His years of wilderness experience immediately engaged as he assessed their tactical situation and began formulating a survival strategy based on their available resources and options. "Bear spray," Bell gasped, pointing toward the location where his equipment had scattered during the initial attack. "Second, canister in my pack." Marcus immediately understood Bell's instruction and began moving toward the scattered gear while maintaining visual contact with the bear, which remained approximately 15 feet away and continued displaying the unpredictable behavior patterns that made their situation extremely dangerous. The bear was now showing signs of agitation, possibly in response to the recovery of the adult human it had believed neutralized, or simply due to the prolonged nature of the encounter that had exceeded its normal territorial defense patterns. Its body language suggested that it was preparing for another aggressive action that could eliminate the remaining threats to its dominance. Riley had reached Evans' position and was attempting to assess his teammates' condition, while remaining alert to the bear's movements and Bell's instructions. Evans' consciousness was clearly compromised, but he was responsive to direct communication and seemed to understand the severity of their situation. "Can you stand if we help you?" Riley asked Evan quietly. "I'll try," Evan replied, though his voice lacked the strength and confidence that had characterized his normal speech patterns. "My right leg won't hold weight, but maybe I can hop or something." Sam was maintaining her position between the bear and their injured teammates, her natural athleticism and competitive instincts helping her stay focused, despite the unprecedented stress of their life-threatening circumstances. Her trail running experience had developed her balance and reaction time to levels that now served her well in avoiding the bear's unpredictable movements. Marcus reached Bell's scattered equipment and quickly located the second canister of bear spray, understanding that this defensive tool represented their most realistic hope for creating enough space and time to evacuate their injured teammates to safety. His hands were shaking from adrenaline as he removed the safety mechanism and prepared the spray for immediate deployment. "Got it, Coach," Marcus reported to Bell while returning to their defensive formation. "What's our plan?" Bell was fighting through pain and disorientation to develop a strategy that might save the lives of his remaining athletes, drawing on 2 decades of wilderness experience and crisis management training that had never been tested under such extreme circumstances. "We need to reach the trail junction," Bell said between labored breaths. "Easier terrain, better visibility, possible rescue access." The trail junction Bell referenced was approximately 200 yards down the mountain from their current position, representing a significant distance to cover while supporting 2 injured team members and maintaining defensive awareness of the bear that continued to threaten their movement. "How do we move Evan that far, with his leg injury?" Sam asked, understanding that their survival plan needed to account for the physical limitations imposed by their casualties. "2 people carry him," Bell replied. "Others maintain defensive positions with spray." Riley was already positioning himself to support Evan's left side, while Sam moved to take his right, leaving Marcus free to use the bear spray if the animal renewed its aggressive behavior during their attempted evacuation. The grizzly bear was watching their preparations with obvious intelligence, seeming to understand that the humans were organizing some form of response to its presence. Its body language suggested heightened alertness and possible preparation for another attack if they made any movements that it interpreted as threatening or challenging. At 9:45 a.m., the team began their desperate attempt to evacuate their injured members while maintaining enough defensive capability to deter further attacks from the bear that had already killed 2 of their group and remained capable of eliminating all of them if they made tactical errors during their withdrawal. Bell was moving under his own power, but clearly struggling with serious injuries that limited his speed and endurance. His wilderness experience and leadership abilities remained intact despite his physical condition, and he continued providing tactical guidance while fighting through pain that would have incapacitated most people. Sam and Riley were supporting Evan between them, allowing him to keep his injured leg elevated while using his left leg and upper body strength to assist in forward movement. Their progress was necessarily slow, but they were successfully moving toward terrain that offered better strategic options for defense and rescue access. Marcus was walking backward behind the group, maintaining visual contact with the bear while keeping the defensive spray ready for immediate deployment. His position allowed him to warn the others of any changes in the animal's behavior while ensuring that they weren't surprised by a renewed attack during their vulnerable evacuation. The bear followed them at a distance of approximately 20 feet, maintaining its territorial dominance over the area, while apparently uncertain about whether to eliminate the remaining intruders or simply ensure their departure from its domain. This behavioral pattern provided the team with mobility while maintaining constant danger that could escalate without warning. "How's everyone holding up?" Bell asked his athletes, using coaching techniques to maintain morale and communication during their life-threatening retreat. "Evan's hanging in there," Sam replied, though her voice reflected concern about their injured teammates' declining condition. "But he's getting heavier, and I don't think he's fully conscious anymore." Indeed, Evan's participation in his own evacuation was becoming increasingly minimal as blood loss and shock progressed, forcing Sam and Riley to support more of his weight while maintaining their pace toward the trail junction that represented their best hope for survival. Marcus was monitoring the bear's behavior while maintaining his defensive position, noting subtle changes in the animal's posture and movement patterns that might indicate preparation for another attack. "It's staying with us, but keeping its distance. I think it's more interested in making sure we leave than in actually killing us." "Don't assume anything," Bell warned, his experience with dangerous wildlife having taught him that animal behavior could change instantaneously based on factors that humans couldn't predict or control. Riley was struggling with his portion of Evan's weight, his smaller frame and lack of upper body strength, making him the limiting factor in their evacuation speed. However, his determination and competitive drive were keeping him focused on his responsibility to his teammate, despite the physical and psychological stress of their situation. "I've got him," Riley said through gritted teeth as Evan's unconsciousness deepened and his body became increasingly limp and difficult to manage. At 9:47 a.m., they reached the trail junction that Bell had identified as their intermediate objective, providing them with improved terrain features and sight lines that enhanced their defensive options while placing them closer to rescue access points and emergency communication range. The junction offered several strategic advantages: clearer visibility in multiple directions, more open terrain that reduced the bear's ability to approach unseen, and proximity to the main trail that rescue personnel would use to reach their location when emergency assistance arrived. Bell immediately began attempting to establish communication with emergency services using his satellite communicator, though his injuries made operating the device challenging and his coordination was impaired by what was clearly a significant head injury. "Emergency services," Bell spoke into the device when he successfully established a connection. "Grizzly bear attack, rattlesnake wilderness, multiple casualties, immediate medical evacuation required." The emergency dispatcher's voice crackled through the satellite communicator's speaker, barely audible due to the device's limited audio capabilities and the ambient forest noise that surrounded their position. "Copy your location and situation," the dispatcher replied. "Emergency medical and rescue teams are being activated. Can you provide specific coordinates and casualty details?" Bell attempted to provide the requested information while simultaneously monitoring the bear's position and his athlete's condition, struggling with the multitasking demands imposed by their crisis situation and his own injuries. Marcus had taken over primary responsibility for bear surveillance, positioning himself where he could observe the animal while maintaining quick access to the defensive spray if needed. The bear had stopped its pursuit when they reached the junction, apparently satisfied that they were leaving its territory, but it remained visible and potentially dangerous. Sam and Riley had lowered Evan to a sitting position against a large rock, allowing them to rest while maintaining readiness to resume evacuation if circumstances required continued movement. Evan's condition continued deteriorating, with obvious signs of shock and possible internal bleeding that required immediate medical intervention. "Evan's pulse is getting weaker," Sam reported to Bell, her voice reflecting growing concern about their teammates' survival prospects. "How long until help arrives?" Bell was still communicating with emergency services, attempting to provide detailed information about their situation while fighting through pain and disorientation that made complex communication extremely challenging. "Medical helicopter en route," Bell reported after completing his conversation with the dispatcher. "Rescue teams mobilizing, but terrain complicates extraction." The reality of their situation was becoming clear. Even with emergency services responding, their remote wilderness location and the presence of aggressive wildlife would complicate rescue operations significantly. They needed to maintain their defensive position and keep their injured teammates alive until professional help could reach them. Riley was monitoring Evan's vital signs, using basic first aid techniques, checking pulse and breathing while attempting to keep him warm and conscious. "He's still breathing, but it's getting shallow. We need medical help soon." Marcus was studying the bear's behavior, noting that it had moved approximately 50 yards away, but continued watching their group with obvious interest. "I think it's going to stay in the area. We need to be ready for it to come back if we do anything that seems threatening." Sam was assessing their overall tactical situation, considering factors like remaining daylight, weather conditions, available resources, and the physical condition of each team member. Her competitive athlete's mindset was helping her maintain focus despite the traumatic events they had witnessed and the continued danger they faced. "What's our plan if the bear comes back before rescue arrives?" Sam asked Bell, understanding that they needed contingency strategies for multiple scenarios. Bell was developing response plans based on his assessment of available resources, terrain features, and the capabilities of his remaining team members. His coaching experience had taught him to prepare for various contingencies, though none of his previous wilderness training had involved scenarios quite as extreme as their current circumstances. "Defensive formation around injured," Bell replied. "Use spray if necessary, but avoid provocation." At 9:52 a.m., their situation was complicated by the arrival of what appeared to be a second bear, smaller than the one that had attacked them, but displaying similar territorial behavior as it investigated the area where the violent encounter had occurred. The presence of multiple bears significantly increased their danger level and complicated their defensive strategies. Marcus immediately alerted the group to this new threat, understanding that their defensive capabilities were already stretched to their limits with a single bear in the area. "There's another one coming from the uphill direction. It looks smaller, but it's definitely heading this way." Bell forced himself to assess this new development despite his injuries and the increasing disorientation from what was clearly a serious head trauma. The presence of multiple bears suggested either a family group or territorial dispute that could make their location extremely dangerous for an extended period. "Could be cubs," Bell said, recognizing that a sow with cubs represented one of the most dangerous wildlife encounters possible in North American wilderness areas. The implications of Bell's assessment were immediately clear to his athletes. A female grizzly with cubs would be extremely aggressive in defending her offspring and territory, potentially attacking any perceived threats with lethal intensity, regardless of the human's defensive capabilities or intentions. Sam was watching both bears while maintaining her position near Evan, who was now unconscious and showing signs of severe shock that required immediate medical intervention. Their situation had deteriorated from dangerous to potentially hopeless as multiple threats converged on their position. "How long did emergency services say until help arrives?" Sam asked Bell, hoping that rescue was imminent enough to provide realistic hope for survival. Bell was struggling to remember details from his communication with emergency services, his head injury affecting his short-term memory and concentration. "Helicopter, 30 minutes, maybe longer, depending on weather conditions." 30 minutes represented an eternity when facing multiple grizzly bears with limited defensive resources and injured team members who required immediate medical attention. The mathematical reality of their situation was becoming undeniable. Their chances of survival were decreasing rapidly as multiple factors aligned against them. Riley was applying pressure to what appeared to be internal bleeding in Evan's abdomen, using techniques he remembered from a basic first aid course, while understanding that his teammates' injuries were beyond the scope of wilderness medicine. "Evan needs surgery soon, or he's not going to make it." Marcus was attempting to monitor both bears simultaneously while maintaining his defensive position with the bear spray, understanding that an attack from multiple directions would overwhelm their ability to respond effectively. His military family background was providing tactical awareness, but their situation exceeded anything that training or preparation could realistically address. The larger bear, which had already killed Logan and injured Bell, was now approaching their position again, apparently drawn by the arrival of the second animal or simply continuing its territorial defense behavior. Its body language suggested renewed aggressive intentions that eliminated any hope for peaceful coexistence. "It's coming back," Marcus warned the group, raising the bear spray in preparation for what might be their final defensive action. At 9:54 a.m., the situation reached its crisis point as both bears converged on their position from different directions, eliminating their escape routes and forcing a confrontation that would determine the ultimate fate of the Roosevelt High School track team's wilderness training session. Bell summoned his remaining strength and experience to provide final leadership for his athletes, understanding that the next few minutes would likely determine whether any of them survived to tell the story of their encounter with the wilderness predators that had turned their training run into a fight for survival. "Stay together," Bell said with as much authority as his injuries allowed. "Whatever happens, we face it as a team." The approaching bears were now within 25 yards of their position, moving with the kind of purposeful determination that indicated they had decided to eliminate the human presence from their territory, regardless of the defensive measures the team might attempt. Sam positioned herself to protect Evan's unconscious form while maintaining readiness to assist with their collective defense, her natural athleticism and competitive drive helping her maintain composure despite facing what appeared to be certain death. Marcus prepared to deploy the bear spray at the optimal moment, understanding that their survival might depend on his ability to time the defensive chemical release perfectly while accounting for wind conditions and the bear's approach angles. Riley was staying close to Bell, ready to provide whatever assistance their injured coach might need, while also preparing to defend their position with his improvised weapons, despite his lack of size and strength compared to the massive predators that threatened them. The larger bear was now within 15 yards, and displaying clear, aggressive intent, its ears flattened against its skull and its mouth open to reveal teeth that could crush human bones with minimal effort. The smaller bear was approaching from their left flank, creating a tactical situation that would require simultaneous defensive actions against multiple threats. At 9:55 a.m., Marcus deployed the bear spray toward the larger animal, creating a dense chemical cloud that temporarily slowed its advance, while causing obvious discomfort to the bear's sensitive nose and eyes. However, the animal's momentum and aggressive mindset allowed it to continue approaching despite the chemical deterrent, just as had happened during their previous encounter. The smaller bear was not affected by the spray deployment and continued its approach from the flank, creating the multiple threat scenario that Bell had feared would overwhelm their defensive capabilities. "Second bear on the left!" Riley shouted, alerting the group to the threat that was not being addressed by their primary defensive measure. Sam grabbed a large rock and hurled it with all her strength at the smaller bear, striking the animal in the shoulder and causing it to pause momentarily, but not retreat or abandon its aggressive approach toward their position. The larger bear emerged from the chemical cloud with renewed fury, apparently enraged by the irritation from the spray rather than deterred by the defensive measure. Its approach was now clearly an attack run that would bring it into direct contact with their group within seconds. Bell attempted to position himself between the attacking bear and his athletes, understanding that his responsibility as their coach required him to absorb whatever violence was necessary to give them additional chances for survival. "Run if you can," Bell said to his remaining athletes, though their tactical situation offered no realistic escape routes with Evan unconscious and the bears approaching from multiple directions. At 9:56 a.m., the second grizzly bear attack began as the larger animal reached their defensive position and struck Sam Torres with enough force to send her tumbling across the rocky trail surface, opening severe wounds across her back and shoulders, while simultaneously eliminating her ability to contribute to their collective defense. Sam's scream echoed through the forest as the bear's claws raked across her body, creating injuries that would require immediate surgical intervention if she survived the encounter. Her competitive athlete's conditioning kept her conscious despite the severe trauma, but her ability to move or defend herself had been eliminated by the bear's devastating attack. Marcus immediately turned the remaining bear spray toward the animal that had just injured Sam, creating another chemical cloud while simultaneously attempting to position himself between the bear and his fallen teammate. His military family training was providing tactical awareness, but the reality of fighting multiple grizzly bears exceeded any scenario that preparation could address. Riley was attempting to drag Evan's unconscious form away from the immediate combat zone, while simultaneously staying close enough to Bell to provide mutual support during what appeared to be their final moments of life. The smaller bear had renewed its approach during the chaos of the larger animal's attack on Sam, creating a second immediate threat that would arrive at their position within moments. Bell was attempting to coordinate their defense despite his serious injuries and the overwhelming nature of their tactical situation. "Marcus, spray the second bear," Bell commanded, his voice carrying authority despite the desperate nature of their circumstances. However, Marcus had already exhausted most of the remaining bear spray during his defense of Sam, leaving them with minimal chemical deterrent for the second animal that was now approaching their position with clear, aggressive intent. The larger bear was standing over Sam's injured form, apparently deciding whether to continue its attack on her or redirect its attention toward the other humans who continued to challenge its territorial dominance. Sam was conscious, but clearly in severe shock from her injuries, unable to move away from the immediate danger zone. At 9:57 a.m., in a moment that would define his character for the remainder of his life, however long that might be, Riley Chen abandoned his position of relative safety and charged directly toward the massive grizzly bear that was preparing to deliver potentially fatal injuries to his teammate Sam Torres. Riley's slight frame and academic background had never prepared him for physical confrontation, yet he found himself wielding his improvised spear with desperate courage as he attempted to drive the weapon into the bear's heavily muscled flank, with enough force to distract it from Sam's vulnerable position. "Get away from her!" Riley screamed as he struck the bear with his makeshift weapon, achieving surprise but no significant physical effect on an animal that outweighed him by several hundred pounds. The bear turned toward Riley with explosive speed, recognizing this new threat and preparing to eliminate it with the same devastating efficiency it had demonstrated against his teammates. Riley found himself staring into small, intelligent eyes that held no mercy or recognition of his humanity. Marcus was attempting to support Riley's desperate attack while simultaneously monitoring the approach of the second bear, understanding that their defensive situation had become hopeless, but refusing to abandon his teammates to face death alone. Bell was crawling toward Sam's position despite his own serious injuries, attempting to provide first aid, while understanding that her wounds were beyond the scope of wilderness medicine. His coaching instincts demanded that he continue caring for his athletes regardless of the personal cost or likelihood of success. The second bear reached their position at 9:58 a.m., creating the nightmare scenario of multiple simultaneous attacks that exceeded their ability to defend against effectively. Riley was facing the larger bear that had just injured Sam, while Marcus prepared to confront the second animal with no remaining chemical deterrents and only improvised weapons. Riley's attack on the larger bear had succeeded in drawing its attention away from Sam, but the animal's response was immediate and devastating. The bear struck Riley with enough force to break multiple ribs and send him tumbling across the trail surface, creating the third serious casualty among Bell's athletes. Riley remained conscious despite his injuries, his analytical mind continuing to process their tactical situation even as his body failed to respond to his commands for movement or defense. His sacrifice had given Sam crucial seconds of relief from the bear's attention, but at the cost of his own survival prospects. Marcus was now facing the second bear alone, armed only with his broken tree branch and the desperate courage that had characterized his team's response to their impossible situation. His military family background was providing mental toughness, but no amount of training could prepare a teenager for single combat against a grizzly bear. "Come on!" Marcus shouted at the approaching bear, accepting his fate while attempting to buy additional time for his injured teammates and coach. The second bear attacked Marcus at 9:59 a.m., striking him with claws that opened severe wounds across his chest and arms, while knocking him to the ground, where its massive weight and jaw strength could complete the deadly assault. Marcus's final conscious thought was gratitude that he had been part of a team that refused to abandon each other even in the face of certain death. Bell was now the only team member still capable of defensive action, though his injuries had severely limited his physical capabilities and his consciousness was fading in and out due to the head trauma he had sustained during the initial attack. Sam, Riley, Marcus and Evan were all down with life-threatening injuries, while Logan's body remained motionless near the location where their desperate fight had begun. Bell understood that he was witnessing the destruction of 5 young lives that had been entrusted to his care, and the weight of that responsibility was crushing him more thoroughly than any physical injury. At 10 a.m., exactly 1 hour after they had begun their wilderness training run, the sound of helicopter rotors became audible in the distance, indicating that emergency rescue services were finally approaching their location. However, the arrival of professional help appeared to be too late to prevent the complete tragedy that had befallen the Roosevelt High School track team. The Bears were apparently startled by the mechanical noise of the approaching aircraft, causing them to withdraw from their attacks on the injured humans and retreat toward the forest cover where they would be protected from this new and unfamiliar threat to their territorial dominance. Bell used his remaining strength to activate his satellite communicator's emergency beacon, providing rescue personnel with precise coordinates for their location while simultaneously attempting to assess which of his athletes might still be alive and treatable by emergency medical services. Multiple casualties, Bell spoke into the communicator as the helicopter noise grew louder. 5 students, 2 confirmed, fatalities, immediate medical evacuation required. The emergency medical helicopter appeared over the forest canopy at 10:02 a.m., piloted by Chief Warrant Officer James Mitchell, a 20-year veteran of wilderness rescue operations who had responded to hundreds of emergency calls throughout the Montana wilderness, but had never encountered a scene quite as devastating as the one developing below his aircraft. "Jesus Christ," Mitchell said into his radio as he surveyed the scene through his aircraft's observation windows. "We've got multiple casualties scattered across approximately 50 yards of trail. I can see at least 2 bodies that appear to be fatalities and several others that need immediate medical attention." Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Reeves, the flight physician aboard the rescue helicopter, was already preparing emergency medical equipment while studying the scene below to prioritize treatment based on the limited information available from their aerial perspective. "Can you land close enough for immediate patient access?" Dr. Reeves asked Mitchell while mentally reviewing trauma protocols for the multiple casualty scenario they were approaching. "Negative on immediate landing," Mitchell replied. "The terrain is too rough and the forest canopy is too dense. We'll need to repel medical personnel and equipment, then establish a landing zone for patient evacuation." Flight medic Timothy Rodriguez was already preparing repelling equipment and emergency medical supplies for immediate deployment to the scene, understanding that the survival of multiple patients would depend on the speed and efficiency of their initial response to what appeared to be catastrophic wilderness trauma. "I'm seeing movement from at least 3 patients," Rodriguez reported as he prepared for immediate deployment. 1 adult male and 2 juvenile patients showing signs of consciousness and potential survivability. Dr. Reeves was studying the scene through medical binoculars, attempting to assess injury patterns and treatment priorities from their aerial vantage point, while understanding that accurate medical evaluation would require direct patient contact. "The adult appears to have significant head trauma, but is conscious and attempting to communicate," Dr. Reeves observed. 2 of the juveniles are showing movement, but appear to have major trauma. 2 others are motionless and may be fatalities. At 10:04 a.m., flight medic Rodriguez rappelled from the helicopter to the trail location, where Bell and his athletes lay scattered across the rocky surface, carrying emergency medical equipment and communications gear that would enable coordination between ground-based treatment and aerial evacuation resources. Rodriguez's first priority was establishing communication with Bell, who appeared to be the only person at the scene capable of providing coherent information about the incident and the medical condition of each patient. "Sir, I'm Tim Rodriguez with Flight for Life," the medic said as he reached Bell's position. "Can you tell me what happened here and how many patients we're dealing with?" Bell struggled to provide coherent information despite his head injury and the emotional trauma of watching his athletes suffer devastating injuries under his supervision. Grizzly bears attacked 5 students, Logan and Evan. I think they're gone. Rodriguez immediately began triaging the casualties, using standard emergency medical protocols to identify which patients had the highest probability of survival with immediate medical intervention. His training had prepared him for multiple casualty scenarios, but the combination of severe trauma and remote wilderness location created extraordinary challenges. "I've got 5 juvenile patients plus 1 adult," Rodriguez reported to Dr. Reeves via radio. 2 juveniles appear to be fatalities. 3 others have severe trauma but are showing vital signs. The adult has significant head trauma but is conscious and communicating. Sam Torres was Rodriguez's first treatment priority among the surviving patients, as her injuries appeared severe but potentially survivable with immediate surgical intervention. She was conscious but showing signs of severe shock from blood loss and trauma, requiring immediate stabilization and rapid evacuation. "Can you hear me?" Rodriguez asked Sam as he began applying pressure bandages to her most severe wounds. "I'm here to help you. You're going to be okay." Sam's response was weak but coherent, indicating that her neurological function remained intact despite her severe physical trauma. "My teammates, are they alive?" Rodriguez was providing honest but encouraging information while focusing on immediate medical priorities rather than the broader tragedy that had affected her team. "We're taking care of everyone. Right now, I need you to stay with me and let me help you." Riley Chen was Rodriguez's second treatment priority, as he was conscious and attempting to communicate despite obvious respiratory distress that suggested internal injuries requiring immediate evaluation. His smaller frame had made him more vulnerable to the bear's attack, but his analytical nature was helping him provide useful medical information. "My ribs are broken," Riley told Rodriguez through labored breathing. "Hard to breathe. Might be internal bleeding." Rodriguez was applying emergency trauma protocols while preparing Riley for helicopter evacuation, understanding that his injuries required surgical intervention that was only available at a major trauma center. "You're doing great. We're going to get you to the hospital very soon." Marcus Johnson appeared to be the most severely injured of the surviving patients, with obvious signs of massive blood loss and possible spinal trauma that complicated both treatment and evacuation procedures. However, he was still showing vital signs and respiratory function that indicated potential survivability with immediate medical intervention. Rodriguez was applying advanced trauma life support measures while coordinating with Dr. Reeves about treatment priorities and evacuation logistics for multiple critical patients. "I need immediate helicopter evacuation for 3 critical patients, plus transport for 1 adult with serious but stable injuries." Dr. Reeves was communicating with trauma centers throughout the region to ensure that appropriate surgical resources would be available when the patients arrived at medical facilities. The severity and complexity of their injuries would require multiple surgical teams and specialized trauma capabilities. "Missoula Community Medical Center is standing by with 3 trauma teams," Dr. Reeves reported. "Flight time is approximately 12 minutes. Are the patients stable for transport?" Rodriguez was making the critical decisions about which patients could survive helicopter transport and which required immediate field treatment that might not be possible given their remote location and limited medical resources. At 10:15 a.m., the first helicopter evacuation began as Rodriguez and Dr. Reeves loaded Sam Torres into the aircraft for immediate transport to surgical facilities. Her condition was critical but potentially survivable if she received immediate medical intervention at a major trauma center. Patient 1 is a 17-year-old female with severe lacerations, possible internal bleeding, and signs of shock, Dr. Reeves reported to the receiving trauma team via radio. ETA 12 minutes. Surgical team should be standing by. The helicopter departed with Sam at 10:18 a.m., leaving Rodriguez on the ground with the remaining patients, while additional aircraft and ground-based rescue personnel worked to establish access for the complex medical and recovery operation that would be required. Riley Chen was prepared for the second evacuation flight, which arrived at 10:35 a.m., piloted by Captain Lisa Henderson, another experienced wilderness rescue pilot who had been diverted from routine patrol duties to assist with the mass casualty incident. Patient 2 is a 14-year-old male with apparent rib fractures, respiratory distress, and possible internal injuries, Rodriguez reported as Riley was loaded into the second aircraft. Conscious and communicating, but showing signs of internal bleeding. Marcus Johnson's condition had deteriorated significantly during the time required to evacuate the first two patients, with signs of massive blood loss and possible spinal trauma that made his transport extremely challenging from a medical perspective. Patient 3 is a 15-year-old male with severe trauma, massive blood loss, and possible spinal injuries, Rodriguez reported as he prepared Marcus for what would likely be the most critical evacuation of the incident. Touch and go for survivability, but he's still showing vital signs. The third helicopter evacuation departed at 10:52 a.m., leaving Rodriguez and several additional rescue personnel to deal with the recovery of Logan Price and Evan Grant, whose bodies would require careful documentation and removal as part of the criminal investigation that would inevitably follow the incident. Bell was evacuated in the fourth helicopter flight at 11:15 a.m., his head injuries requiring medical evaluation despite his relatively stable condition compared to his athletes. His emotional trauma from witnessing the destruction of his team was clearly as significant as his physical injuries. Adult male with head trauma, possible concussion, and severe emotional distress, Dr. Patricia Gonzalez reported as Bell was loaded into the aircraft. Physically stable, but will require comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation. The recovery operation for Logan Price and Evan Grant required the coordinated efforts of Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks investigators, Missoula County Sheriff's deputies, and Forest Service personnel who would document the scene and remove the bodies with appropriate dignity and respect. Wildlife investigator Captain Robert Sterling was the lead official responsible for determining the circumstances of the bear attacks and assessing whether the animals posed continued threats to public safety that might require additional management actions. "We're dealing with an unprecedented wildlife incident," Sterling reported to his supervisors as he surveyed the scene where two young people had lost their lives. Multiple grizzly bears, multiple human casualties, and a complex investigation that will require coordination between several agencies. Dr. Amanda Foster, the Missoula County Medical Examiner, arrived at the scene at 1:30 p.m. to oversee the recovery and initial examination of the two fatalities, understanding that their deaths would require comprehensive forensic analysis as part of the official investigation. Both victims show signs of massive trauma consistent with large predator attacks, Dr. Foster observed as she conducted preliminary examinations. Detailed forensic analysis will be required to determine exact cause of death and sequence of events. The recovery of Logan Price's body was completed at 2:45 p.m., with appropriate honors recognizing his heroic efforts to protect his teammates during the attack. His sacrifice had undoubtedly saved lives, though at the ultimate cost of his own promising future. Evan Grant's body was recovered at 3:20 p.m., bringing closure to the wilderness phase of a tragedy that would have lasting impacts on the Missoula community and the families whose lives had been forever changed by the events of May 23, 2024. By 4 p.m. on May 23rd, the immediate rescue and recovery operations at the attack site had been completed, but the broader response to the tragedy was just beginning as medical teams fought to save the lives of 3 critically injured teenagers, while investigators worked to understand exactly what had happened in the Montana wilderness. Sam Torres underwent her first surgery at Missoula Community Medical Center at 11:45 a.m. with Dr. Michael Chen leading a trauma team that worked for nearly 4 hours to repair the massive tissue damage and internal injuries she had sustained during the bear attack. The patient has suffered severe lacerations across her back and shoulders, with muscle and tissue damage that will require multiple reconstructive procedures, Dr. Chen reported to Sam's parents, Roberto and Maria Torres, who had rushed to the hospital upon receiving notification of the incident. "Will she survive?" Maria Torres asked through tears, her voice reflecting the anguish of a mother confronting the possibility of losing her daughter to a wilderness tragedy that had already claimed 2 young lives. "Her vital signs are stable following the initial surgery," Dr. Chen replied carefully. "However, she faces a long recovery process and will require several additional procedures to address the full extent of her injuries. The next 24 hours will be critical." Riley Chen underwent emergency surgery at 1:20 p.m. to address internal bleeding and repair multiple rib fractures that had damaged his respiratory system during the bear attack. Dr. Lisa Park, the pediatric trauma surgeon, led the medical team that worked to stabilize his condition. The patient has suffered significant internal trauma, but his vital signs remain stable, Dr. Park reported to Riley's parents, Dr. David Chen and Dr. Lisa Wang Chen, who had arrived at the hospital immediately upon receiving notification. "What's his prognosis for full recovery?" Dr. Chen asked, his scientific background helping him understand the medical complexities while struggling with the emotional reality of his son's life-threatening injuries. "Too early to determine long-term outcomes," Dr. Park replied honestly. "We've addressed the immediate threats to his life, but he'll require extensive monitoring and possibly additional procedures as his condition evolves." Marcus Johnson's condition was the most critical of the 3 survivors, with massive blood loss and possible spinal trauma that required the coordinated efforts of multiple surgical specialists working simultaneously to address his life-threatening injuries. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the chief trauma surgeon, led the team that worked for nearly 6 hours to stabilize Marcus's condition while addressing the complex combination of injuries he had sustained during the prolonged bear attack. "The patient has suffered massive trauma to multiple organ systems," Dr. Martinez reported to Marcus's parents, Sergeant First Class Jerome Johnson and Angela Johnson, who had driven from Malmstrom Air Force Base immediately upon receiving notification. "Is he going to make it?" Sergeant Johnson asked, his military training helping him maintain composure while confronting the possibility that his son might not survive the wilderness tragedy. "We've done everything possible to address the immediate threats to his life," Dr. Martinez replied. "However, his injuries are extremely severe, and his recovery will depend on factors beyond our immediate control. The next several days will be critical." Coach Andrew Bell underwent medical evaluation for his head injury and other trauma at 2:30 p.m., with Dr. James Wright conducting comprehensive neurological assessments to determine the extent of his injuries and their potential long-term impacts. The patient has suffered a significant concussion with some associated brain swelling, Dr. Wright reported to Bell's wife, Sarah, who had rushed to the hospital upon receiving the devastating news about the attack on her husband's team. "Will there be permanent damage?" Sarah Bell asked, her voice reflecting concern not just for her husband's physical condition, but for the emotional trauma of losing two of his beloved athletes. "The physical injuries appear to be manageable with appropriate treatment," Dr. Wright replied. "However, the psychological trauma of this incident will require extensive counseling and support. He's going to need time and professional help to process what he's experienced." As the medical teams worked to save the lives of the attack survivors, news of the tragedy began spreading throughout the Missoula community and beyond, generating the kind of media attention and public response that typically accompanies rare but devastating wilderness incidents. KPAX-TV News. Director Jennifer Walsh received the first media notification of the incident at 11:30 a.m., immediately recognizing that the story would have significant local and potentially national interest given the rarity of fatal grizzly bear attacks and the involvement of high school athletes. "We've got reports of a multiple casualty bear attack in the Rattlesnake Wilderness," Walsh announced to her news team. "2 fatalities, multiple injuries, high school track team involved. This is going to be huge." Reporter Michael Davidson was assigned to cover the story, beginning with immediate response from Roosevelt High School and the families of the affected athletes. His initial report would establish the narrative framework that would shape public understanding of the tragedy. A wilderness training run turned deadly this morning when members of the Roosevelt High School track team were attacked by grizzly bears in the Rattlesnake Recreation Area, Davidson reported in his first live broadcast at 1 p.m. The Associated Press picked up the story at 2:15 p.m., distributing initial reports to news outlets throughout the region and generating the broader media attention that would make the Roosevelt High School bear attack a nationally significant story. 2 Montana high school students were killed and 3 others critically injured Thursday morning when grizzly bears attacked their cross-country team during a wilderness training run north of Missoula, the AP report began. Roosevelt High School principal Margaret Thompson held an emergency press conference at 3 p.m. to address the school community and provide official information about the incident while respecting the privacy of the affected families during their time of crisis. "Our hearts are broken today as we mourn the loss of Logan Price and Evan Grant, 2 outstanding young men who embodied everything we hope for in our students," Principal Thompson said, her voice reflecting the grief that was overwhelming the entire school community. "We are also praying for the recovery of Sam Torres, Riley Chen, and Marcus Johnson, who are fighting for their lives at Missoula Community Medical Center." Coach Andrew Bell, who showed extraordinary courage in protecting his athletes, is also receiving medical treatment. The Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Department initiated an immediate investigation into the incident, led by wildlife investigator Captain Robert Sterling, who would be responsible for determining whether the bears involved posed continued threats to public safety. "Our preliminary investigation suggests this was an extremely rare encounter involving multiple grizzly bears in an area where such incidents are virtually unprecedented," Sterling reported during a press conference at 4:30 p.m. "We are working with federal partners and local law enforcement to conduct a comprehensive investigation that will help us understand exactly what happened and determine appropriate management responses." The Rattlesnake Recreation Area was immediately closed to public access pending completion of the investigation and assessment of continued wildlife threats, affecting hundreds of outdoor recreation enthusiasts who regularly used the trails for hiking, running, and mountain biking. Forest Service officials coordinated with wildlife managers to track the bears involved in the attack, using helicopters and ground teams equipped with tranquilizer equipment to locate and potentially capture the animals for evaluation and possible relocation. "Public safety is our absolute priority," said Forest Service District Ranger Patricia Hoffman. Until we can locate and assess the bears involved in this incident, the Rattlesnake area will remain closed to all recreational activities. The University of Montana Department of Wildlife Biology was consulted to provide expert analysis of bear behavior patterns and environmental factors that might have contributed to the unprecedented multiple bear attack on the track team. Dr. Christopher Servheen, a nationally recognized expert on grizzly bear ecology and behavior, was asked to review the incident and provide professional assessment of the factors that might have led to such an unusual and deadly encounter. Multiple bear attacks on humans are extremely rare, Dr. Servheen explained during a consultation with investigators. This type of incident typically involves either a sow defending cubs, bears competing for food resources, or animals that have been conditioned to associate humans with food sources. The investigation would eventually reveal that the bears involved in the attack were a mother grizzly with two nearly adult cubs, defending what they perceived as territorial intrusion during a critical period when the family group was preparing to separate as the cubs reached independence. Weather conditions, seasonal food availability, and the team's movement patterns had combined to create a perfect storm of circumstances that led to the tragic encounter between predators defending their territory and young athletes who were simply pursuing their passion for running in the wilderness. The first 48 hours following the attack would prove critical not only for the medical recovery of the surviving athletes, but also for the investigation that would determine whether criminal charges might be filed and what policy changes might be necessary to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Sam Torres remained in critical condition through the night of May 23rd, requiring multiple blood transfusions and intensive monitoring as her medical team worked to stabilize her condition and prepare for additional reconstructive surgeries. "She's fighting," Dr. Chen reported to her parents during an update at 6 a.m. on May 24th. "Her vital signs have stabilized, and she's showing signs of neurological responsiveness that suggest she's going to survive the immediate crisis." Riley Chen showed steady improvement throughout the night, with his respiratory function stabilizing and his pain levels becoming manageable through appropriate medication. His parents maintained a constant vigil at his bedside, providing emotional support while processing their own trauma from the near loss of their son. "He's going to recover," Dr. Park confirmed during morning rounds on May 24th. "He'll require several weeks of hospitalization and months of rehabilitation, but his prognosis for full recovery is good." Marcus Johnson's condition remained critical but stable, with his medical team cautiously optimistic about his survival prospects despite the severity of his injuries. His parents had flown in additional family members from their extended military community to provide support during the crisis. "He's a fighter," Sergeant Johnson said during a brief statement to media representatives who had gathered at the hospital. "That's what we raised him to be, and that's what's going to get him through this." Coach Andrew Bell was released from the hospital on the afternoon of May 24th, though his recovery would require extensive physical therapy for his injuries and psychological counseling to address the trauma of losing two athletes under his supervision. "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," Bell said to his wife Sarah as they prepared to leave the hospital. "Those boys trusted me to keep them safe, and I failed them." The funeral arrangements for Logan Price and Evan Grant began taking shape on May 24th, with both families working to plan services that would honor their sons' lives while providing comfort to the broader community that was grieving alongside them. Logan's funeral was scheduled for May 29th at First Presbyterian Church in Missoula, with burial at Sunset Memorial Gardens. The service would be open to the public, reflecting Logan's impact on the broader community through his athletic achievements and character. Evan's funeral was planned for May 30th at St. Francis Xavier Catholic Church, with burial at Calvary Cemetery. His family requested that donations be made to mental health organizations that supported teenagers dealing with family difficulties and other challenges. Roosevelt High School announced that classes would be cancelled on both funeral days, with grief counselors available throughout the week to help students and staff process the tragedy that had affected the entire school community. Logan and Evan were more than just athletes, Principal Thompson said during a school assembly on May 25th. They were leaders, friends, and young men who made everyone around them better people. Their legacy will live on in all of us. The investigation into the bear attack continued, with wildlife officials working to locate and assess the animals involved in the incident. Initial tracking efforts had identified the general area where the bear family was located, but capture operations were complicated by the rough terrain and the animals' natural wariness of human activity. "We've located what we believe to be the bear family involved in the incident," Captain Sterling reported on May 25th. "Our next step is to determine whether these animals pose continued threats to public safety and what management actions might be appropriate." The bears would eventually be located and assessed by wildlife professionals who determined that their behavior, while tragic in its consequences, was consistent with normal territorial defense patterns and did not indicate abnormal aggression that would require the animals to be destroyed. This appears to have been a case of wrong place, wrong time, rather than abnormal bear behavior, Dr. Servine concluded after reviewing the investigation findings. The bears were defending their territory during a critical period, and the human presence was perceived as a threat that required elimination. The Rattlesnake Recreation Area would remain closed for 3 weeks, while wildlife officials continued monitoring bear activity and implementing additional safety measures designed to reduce the likelihood of similar encounters in the future. Enhanced warning systems, modified trail routes, and increased ranger presence would eventually allow the area to reopen with improved safety protocols, though the tragedy would forever change how wilderness education and recreational activities were managed in the region. The media coverage of the Roosevelt High School bear attack intensified throughout the week following the incident, with national news outlets sending reporters to Missoula to cover the story and its impact on the local community. CNN correspondent Sarah Mitchell arrived in Missoula on May 25th to provide national coverage of the story, focusing on both the specific details of the incident and the broader issues of wildlife management and wilderness safety that the tragedy had highlighted. This attack has raised important questions about how we balance recreational access to wilderness areas with the reality that these are home to dangerous wildlife, Mitchell reported during her first live broadcast from Missoula. NBC News correspondent David Chen, no relation to Riley Chen, provided analysis of the incident within the context of increasing human-wildlife conflicts throughout the American West as development and recreational use expanded into traditional wildlife habitat. Incidents like this are rare but devastating reminders that true wilderness areas contain genuine dangers that can't be eliminated through management or preparation, Chen reported during the NBC Nightly News on May 26th. The Discovery Channel announced plans for a documentary about the incident, though the project would be delayed for several months to allow the affected families time to grieve and the survivors time to begin their recovery process. Outside Magazine published a comprehensive analysis of the incident within the broader context of bear safety and wilderness education, raising questions about whether current safety protocols were adequate for the realities of modern recreational use of grizzly bear habitat. The Roosevelt High School attack represents a worst-case scenario that challenges our assumptions about wilderness safety and the effectiveness of standard bear awareness protocols, the magazine's analysis concluded. The legal implications of the incident began emerging during the week following the attack, with several families consulting attorneys about potential liability issues related to the school district's wilderness education program and safety protocols. Attorneys representing the Price and Grant families announced on May 27th that they would be conducting independent investigations into the incident to determine whether negligence or inadequate safety measures had contributed to the tragedy. While this appears to have been a tragic accident, we have a responsibility to ensure that all appropriate safety measures were in place and that this incident couldn't have been prevented through different policies or procedures, said attorney Robert Jackson, representing the Price family. The Missoula School District immediately retained legal counsel and began comprehensive reviews of all outdoor education policies and procedures, understanding that the district could face significant legal liability depending on the investigation findings. Our hearts go out to all the families affected by this tragedy, said District Superintendent Dr. Linda Martinez. We are committed to full cooperation with all investigations and to ensuring that our outdoor education programs meet the highest possible safety standards. The Montana State Legislature announced plans for hearings on wilderness safety and outdoor education policies, with several lawmakers calling for comprehensive reviews of current regulations and safety requirements for school-sponsored activities in potentially dangerous environments. We need to learn everything we can from this tragedy to ensure that it never happens again, said State Senator Michael Thompson, who represented the Missoula area. That means looking at our policies, our training requirements, and our safety protocols with fresh eyes. The financial impact of the incident began emerging as medical bills for the 3 survivors mounted rapidly, with each family facing potential costs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for immediate medical care, ongoing rehabilitation, and long-term psychological treatment. A community fundraising effort was organized by Roosevelt High School parent volunteers with the goal of raising money to help cover medical expenses and support the affected families during their recovery process. These families shouldn't have to worry about money while they're dealing with such an enormous tragedy, said fundraising coordinator Janet Morrison. Our community needs to come together to support them in every way possible. The Roosevelt Track and Field Memorial Fund was established with initial donations totaling over $50,000, with contributions coming from throughout the Missoula area and from alumni of Bell's track programs who had been inspired by his coaching and mentorship over the years. National running and outdoor recreation organizations also contributed to the fundraising effort, recognizing that the tragedy had affected not just the local community, but the broader community of people who shared the victims' passion for running and outdoor adventure. The University of Montana announced the establishment of the Logan Price and Evan Grant Memorial Scholarship Fund, which would provide financial support for students pursuing studies in outdoor recreation, wildlife management, or related fields. Logan and Evan embodied the spirit of adventure and love of the outdoors that defines Montana, said University President Dr. Seth Bodnar. This scholarship will ensure that their passion for the wilderness continues to inspire future generations. The emotional impact of the tragedy continued reverberating through the Missoula community throughout the weeks following the incident, with grief counselors reporting unprecedented demand for services as people struggled to process the loss of 2 promising young lives. Roosevelt High School brought in additional counselors from throughout the region to help students and staff deal with the grief and trauma that had affected the entire school community. Several students reported difficulty sleeping, concentrating on academic work, and participating in normal social activities. It's hard to imagine how life can just go back to normal after something like this, said junior Sarah Martinez, who had been friends with both Logan and Evan. Everything feels different now, like the world is more dangerous than we thought it was. The track and field teams struggled particularly with the loss of their teammates and coaches' injuries, with several athletes requiring intensive counseling to address survivor guilt and anxiety about continuing their athletic participation. "I keep thinking it should have been me instead," said senior Jennifer Walsh, who had been selected for the wilderness training session but had been unable to participate due to a minor injury. "Logan and Evan were better people than I am. Why did they die instead of me?" The broader running community throughout Montana and the region also struggled with the implications of the tragedy for their own participation in wilderness running and training activities. Many runners reported feeling increased anxiety about training in areas where wildlife encounters were possible, while others expressed determination to continue pursuing their passion despite the risks that had been so tragically demonstrated. "We can't let fear control our lives," said veteran ultramarathoner and wilderness running advocate Dr. Tom Wilson. "But we also can't ignore the reality that wilderness activities involve genuine risks that require respect and preparation." The 3-month anniversary of the attack, August 23, 2024, was marked by memorial services and community events designed to honor the memory of Logan Price and Evan Grant, while celebrating the recovery progress of the 3 survivors. Sam Torres had undergone 4 additional surgeries and was beginning physical therapy to regain full use of her right arm and shoulder, which had been severely damaged during the bear attack. Her recovery was progressing well, though she would require several more months of rehabilitation. "I'm determined to run again," Sam said during a brief statement at the memorial service. "Logan and Evan would want all of us to keep pursuing our dreams, even after something like this. I'm going to honor their memory by getting back to the sport we all loved." Riley Chen had recovered sufficiently to return to school for his sophomore year, though he continued dealing with anxiety and post-traumatic stress symptoms that required ongoing psychological treatment. His analytical nature was helping him process the trauma through detailed journaling and discussion with counselors. "Writing about what happened helps me understand it and deal with the emotions," Riley explained to a reporter. "I know Logan and Evan would want me to use my experience to help other people, so I'm working on a book about wilderness safety and trauma recovery." Marcus Johnson had made remarkable progress in his recovery, though he would require additional surgeries and rehabilitation to address the long-term effects of his injuries. His military family background was providing structure and support that facilitated his healing process. "Every day I wake up is a gift," Marcus said during the memorial service. "Logan and Evan gave their lives trying to protect their teammates. The least I can do is make sure I use the life they helped save to make a positive difference in the world." Coach Andrew Bell had returned to teaching at Roosevelt High School, but had taken a leave of absence from coaching while he continued his own recovery and worked through the trauma of losing 2 athletes under his supervision. "I may never coach again," Bell admitted during the memorial service. "The responsibility for what happened will always be mine to carry. But I want to honor Logan and Evan by continuing to help young people in whatever way I can." Though the 1-year anniversary of the attack, May 23, 2025, was marked by the dedication of a memorial trail in the Rattlesnake Recreation Area, designed to honor the memory of Logan Price and Evan Grant, while providing education about wilderness safety and wildlife awareness. The Logan Price and Evan Grant Memorial Trail featured interpretive signs about bear safety, emergency procedures, and the importance of respecting wildlife habitat, serving as both a tribute to the young men who died and a resource for future wilderness users. This trail will ensure that Logan and Evan's legacy includes helping others stay safe in the wilderness they loved so much, said Roosevelt High School Principal Margaret Thompson during the dedication ceremony. Sam Torres, who had returned to competitive running and earned a full scholarship to the University of Montana, spoke at the dedication ceremony about the importance of continuing to pursue outdoor activities despite the risks involved. Logan and Evan died doing something they loved, in a place they loved, with people they loved, Sam said. We honor them by continuing to find joy and meaning in the wilderness while being smarter and more careful about the risks we take. The investigation into the bear attack was officially concluded in June 2025, with findings that the incident resulted from an extremely rare combination of circumstances rather than negligence or inadequate safety measures by the school district or Coach Bell. This appears to have been a genuine accident that could not have been prevented through different policies or procedures, concluded the final investigative report. The safety measures in place were appropriate for the activity being conducted, and the response to the emergency was exemplary under extremely difficult circumstances. The families of Logan Price and Evan Grant announced that they would not pursue legal action against the school district, instead focusing their efforts on supporting wildlife education and wilderness safety initiatives that could help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Legal action won't bring our boys back, said Marcus Price, Logan's father, but supporting education and safety programs might help save other families from going through what we've experienced. The Roosevelt High School track and field program was rebuilt over the following years under new coaching leadership with enhanced safety protocols and a continued commitment to wilderness training that honored the memory of Logan Price and Evan Grant, while acknowledging the lessons learned from the tragedy. Coach Bell eventually returned to coaching in 2026, accepting a position at a school district in a different state where he could continue his life's work of mentoring young athletes while carrying the lessons and memories from the most difficult day of his career. I'll never stop missing Logan and Evan, Bell said during his farewell ceremony at Roosevelt High School. But I know they would want me to keep helping young people discover their strength and potential, just like they did. The three survivors of the attack continued their recovery and went on to lead productive lives that honored the memory of their fallen teammates. Sam Torres became an advocate for wilderness safety education. Riley Chen pursued a career in wildlife management and conservation, and Marcus Johnson followed his family's military tradition while specializing in search and rescue operations. We survived for a reason, the three wrote in a joint statement on the 5th anniversary of the attack in 2029. Our responsibility is to make sure that Logan and Evan's sacrifice continues to make a difference in the world through our actions and through the lives we touch. The Roosevelt High School bear attack of May 23, 2024, remains one of the most documented and analyzed wildlife incidents in Montana history, serving as a case study for wilderness safety education. And a reminder of both the beauty and the danger that coexist in America's remaining wild places. The tragedy ultimately led to improved safety protocols for outdoor education programs throughout the region, enhanced wildlife management strategies for areas with high recreational use, and a deeper understanding of the complex relationships between humans and wildlife in an increasingly interconnected world. Logan and Evan's story reminds us that the wilderness demands our respect and humility, wrote Dr. Christopher Servine in his final report on the incident. Their deaths were tragic and senseless, but their legacy can help ensure that future generations approach wild places with the knowledge and preparation necessary to minimize such risks while still experiencing the transformative power of connection with the natural world. The memorial trail dedicated to Logan Price and Evan Grant continues to be used by thousands of outdoor enthusiasts each year, serving as both a place of remembrance and a resource for education about the responsibilities that come with entering the domain of wild animals in their natural habitat. Their story lives on in the hearts of everyone who knew them, in the safety protocols that evolved from the investigation of their deaths, and in the continued pursuit of outdoor adventure by young people who understand that honoring their memory means both embracing the wilderness they loved and respecting the power of the natural forces that claimed their lives on a spring morning in the Montana mountains.